Welcome back to the channel. This is Trendy Storm and you are watching first part of What If Naruto Left before Iruka's speech to Mizuki. If you enjoy this video, please like, share and subscribe to this channel. Now wasting no more time, let's start the story.
After 3 weeks of unlimited breakfast, lunch, dinner, and snack buffets, he felt heavier than Choji, but since he was now practically a ninja, he was certain it was worthwhile. All he needed to do was wait for Mizuki-sensei to demonstrate the newly acquired jutsu. He knew he could pull it off this time. Iruka-sensei staggered into the clearing at that very moment. It appeared that the test's last section was about to begin. Naruto said, "Sensei, you're early, but that's okay. I'm ready to rock the repeat exam." Iruka, however, appeared prepared for anything but the test. He felt very uneasy about this. "Naruto, what do you mean repeat exam?" he asked. Well, I guess Mizuki-sensei didn't tell you? He gave me another chance to become a ninja. I had to get this scroll and learn one jutsu until he or another examiner comes to check on me. If by then I can perform one jutsu of this scroll, I become a ninja. Great, isn't it? And it gets better. I learned a jutsu already, so all I have to do is to wait for an examiner and show him what I learned. Believe it, Naruto said to his sensei. Since Naruto speaks more quickly than Kiba could get away from his homework, Iruka knew Naruto had been duped before he had even completed his explanation. The prankster himself was duped, which was almost comical. However, no one would play a simple practical joke with the forbidden scroll. No. Mizuki attempted to frame Naruto, and this was obviously treason. A shuriken struck him at the same moment as that thought. He was so taken aback that he completely forgot about everything else. Well, it's too late now. He needed to get the scroll and Naruto out of here. Iruka screamed, hoping Naruto would finally pay attention to him. "Naruto, Mizuki used you. There is no repeat exam. Take the scroll and run. Make sure Mizuki won't get the scroll." It even appeared to be so until Mizuki opened his jaw. "Naruto, don't you want to know why everyone hates you? I will tell you. You are the Kyuubi. The fourth never killed the demon. He only made sure you could never again hurt anyone. You were the reason so many people died 12 years ago, even Iruka's parents." It simply couldn't be that Naruto was speechless. However, suddenly, many things made a lot more sense. He recalled hearing a lot of whispers about a demon. It seemed as though he was being followed by those whispers. He recalled how store owners would eject him as soon as he entered their establishments. He recalled how he would make new friends one day and then they would stop talking to him the next day. He recalled how Hokage Jiji would encourage him by telling him that patience was a crucial quality for a ninja. The world came to a screeching stop, and he knew Hokage Jiji was aware of it. He didn't tell him anything, even though he knew who he was. After years of wondering what went wrong, years of hoping that people would like him once he was strong enough, and years of searching for anyone who would be willing to be his friend, how come Hokage Jiji didn't tell him? Did he fear Naruto would attempt to devour someone? He had questioned why he was despised more times than he could remember. Did he not tell him anything else? When Naruto had had enough, he turned around and fled, avoiding Mizuki and Iruka-sensei. He ran as fast as he could and as far away. He began to lose his vision from tears. He didn't care, didn't see, and didn't know where he was running as long as it was as far away as possible from Konoha, from here. And from this dishonest Hokage. He was unaware that he still had the scroll in his possession. After a few weeks, Konoha's situation has subsided. Iruka was in the hospital and Mizuki was in prison. Everyone was aware that Naruto had been set up and would be returned to the village if he was discovered. Living and well. Many thanks for that. However, everyone was also aware that he was probably dead or so far away that they would never see him again because the hunter nins had not yet discovered him. Nearly the entire village held a huge festival to commemorate Naruto's disappearance. Some were even concerned that someone might take advantage of Naruto and turn him against Konoha. Not for his safety. He was, after all, the most powerful Biju's Jinchuriki. Naruto himself only worried a small number of people. Naruto had lived through better times indeed. His days of homelessness following his expulsion from the orphanage were better times. He felt cold, lonely, and afraid. At least he wasn't hungry or thirsty because he had acquired enough survival skills in the academy because of his numerous pranks. He was also relieved to have learned how to hide. Never in his life had he seen so many hunternins. That scroll would only provide the hunternins with a trail, so he couldn't even return it or leave it there. After all, Konoha could get his just desserts, so a tiny part of him didn't even want to give the scroll away. Slowly, carefully, and even more stealthily, Naruto was moving toward Fire Country's border. When he arrived, he hanged into a young man who appeared to be a traveler who didn't want to attract attention. Where could he go, he wondered, and where should he go now? Both the north and the west of the Fire Nation had good trade roads. Thus, Konoha ninjas would probably be present since he couldn't go to Konoha. Perhaps the locals would even sell him to them. The ocean to the south was also off limits. The east was left out. He was taught by Iruka sensei that a mountain served as a sort of natural barrier, and even after that, he believed that the land was the land of diamonds, where only Jonins were sent because of the strength of the ninjas, in part due to the lack of friendliness between Diamond and Fire. Well, there should be some safety for him. A few weeks later, Naruto had just arrived in Titan, the capital of the diamonds. It was the largest city he had ever seen, and he had never seen so many women. Only 4 of the more than 100 people he must have seen so far were men. And there were no other boys at all. In fact, based on the looks he was receiving, he questioned whether anyone in this room had ever heard of boys. People thought he was a cute animal that had gone extinct, and they treated him like that. In reality, he had wished to avoid drawing attention to himself due to the Hunternans, but this was not possible at all. He couldn't bring himself to worry, though, because everyone here was so kind. Shopkeepers invited him and gave him free stuff. Girls wanted to play with him, women would give him candy, and most importantly, everyone wanted to talk to him and pay attention to him. After just 3 hours in Titan, he had already made a number of friends, all of whom were girls his own age, and had been given free food and lodging. Since he would eventually need his energy, he had abandoned his henge in the middle of the mountains. Furthermore, because he was so uncommon in Titan, he was certain that no one would permit Konoha to take him. Life was good. He could spend all day playing with Titan's girls, and that's what he was doing now. He had been brought to a forest close to the palace by 3 girls. It was enormous. The palace and the forest, both. They played hide and seek. No one would have played with him in Konoha because he had practiced hiding through pranks. Naruto was also quite skilled at it. Now he was behind a huge, dense tree with an odd symbol carved into its trunk. He intended to use his finger to trace the symbol's lines, but as soon as he touched it, a light burst forth. The entire tree was gone when the light faded. Instead, there were stairs that led to a cave deep within the earth. Naruto was certain that this would be an excellent hiding spot, so he descended the steps and continued into the cave. Naruto was taken aback by the sheer number of roots, some of which even had doors built into the stone walls. Furthermore, there was simply no end in sight. Was the entire city covered by this cave? Why wasn't anyone present? And in any case, were you here? He got lost, damn it. Since none of the girls would be able to locate themselves if he couldn't, he was certain to win this game of hide and seek. But before he could at least ask someone where he was, he needed to figure out how to get to the surface. Naruto followed the path that appeared to go a little higher in the maze. Strangely, the farther he went into the cave, the more it resembled a basement. Simply put, no house would require such a large basement in the first place, and nothing was kept here. However, the cave now resembled the floor of a fancy restaurant, minus the windows, but still, no one was around. 2 hours prior, Naruto had ceased searching behind the doors. There were only more doors and passageways. He simply followed a straight path while listening for someone or something. 3 days and an eternity later, he heard voices. You know as they will, better than I thought you. The largest and most exquisite room Naruto had ever seen was revealed when he followed the voices through a door. After inheriting the egos of his entire clan, Sasuke Tomi's ego was dwarfed by the bed alone. Huge paintings were all over the place. In fact, the door he had just entered was entirely covered in one depicting a striking waterfall. He located the 2 women he had previously heard about. They were both about 200 years old. One wore a secretary's or librarian's outfit. No words could ever adequately describe the beauty of the kimono worn by the other, who was sitting at a desk over some papers. In addition, she had on more jewelry than he could handle. Naruto was a little anxious because he had just entered the bedroom of a wealthy man without even wearing slippers. I hope these guys were funny. Naruto asks cautiously, excuse me, I sort of got lost. Can you tell me where the exit is? All he wanted to do was run, but fuck, his presence wasn't his fault. No one was complaining that he shouldn't enter the cave because he wouldn't be able to tell where he was going once he was there. That maze was insane. Who was he? The 2 women asked, unable to speak. And why was he in this place? And why in the world was a child in the palace without any adult supervision? In the royal bedroom, even worse? He had just met the Queen of Diamond, and Naruto was unaware that he had surprised her more than a declaration of war. Who the hell are you? Asked her secretary, who somewhat recovered first. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. Listen, I really didn't want to come here wherever here as I was just playing in the forest, when a tree disappeared and turned into a cave, and I really just wanted to have a short look at it really. But then, the cave turned into a maze and I got lost and I was trying to find an exit like forever, and then I heard you and came here. I really didn't want to cause trouble. Naruto responded with a quick explanation. Queen Sari's voice returned by the time Naruto was done. Calm down, it's no problem, but I am curious how you ended up here. Do you think You could find the entrance to the maze again? So I could make sure nobody else gets lost there. Naruto replied, sure thing. It was in the forest, in front of the palace. Thus, the queen and her still stunned assistant escorted Naruto to the aforementioned forest. The queen's thoughts were racing. In the meantime, she was aware of the basement, yes. However, there was a seal on each entrance that only royal family members could open. Was a seal damaged or even taken out? However, the entrance would simply be locked, so that couldn't be either. Furthermore, what exactly was a young boy doing in Titan? The bloodline simply prevented any boys from being born here. He also bore a striking resemblance to her daughter Carrie. However, that was even less likely because she would still have girls despite having vanished so long ago. Still, she was unable to resist hoping to at last have a relative who is still young enough to maintain the royal family line, despite their distance. Then she noticed it. The seal that allowed her family to enter the basement. It was still flawless after being carved into the wood for her and no one else, not even her husband. The tree would vanish. She believed that, at least, until the tree disappeared in that familiar glow after this boy touched it. Although the queen wasn't entirely sure how she felt about all of this, her assistant appeared to feel the same way as she passed out. Naruto was trying to get over his earlier shock when he returned to the palace a short while later, this time entering through the front gates. He had family. He was still in disbelief, after being ignorant for so many years. What about a family? His own father was the fourth Hokage. On his mother's side, the queen herself was his great-grandmother. This was his opportunity to live with his family. Queen Sari wrote his family tree using a seal made from his blood. The outcome appeared on a sizable scroll, which Naruto instinctively held onto tightly. To allow him to keep his version, they created an additional scroll using that seal. The council would require evidence that he was related to her, so Queen Sari needed his family tree. His family was going to live with him. He could already see the first changes. Two women were watching Naruto and conversing with him to make sure he wasn't bored, and a servant was sent to fetch his belongings. The best part was that they knew his grandmother, who was the queen's daughter. He was merely hearing tales about her. The council, meanwhile, was just as skeptical of Naruto's ancestry as he was. Korra questioned, "Are you absolutely sure?" Korra was usually quite reserved and would frequently remain silent throughout a meeting. It's funny that after this shock, she was the first to regain her voice. "I checked twice and I know both seals were perfect. Not to mention he was able to open a door to the basement." The queen replied, "But a boy, it should be impossible because of our bloodline alone. And how could he know, when we had no clue, that an heir was still alive?" Korra continued to be unpersuaded. "Oh, he didn't know he found an entrance to the basement and got lost. He came out in my bedroom and asked where the exit was." The queen laughed. Korra was finally persuaded, saying, "Well, that does sound like Carrie." The other members had already recovered from their shock by this point. Namiko inquired, "Does the prince still have our bloodline?" "I think so, otherwise the seal to the basement would have knocked him out even with him being related to me," replied the queen. She was already aware that Naruto's presence would create a stir in the entire world, not just in Diamonds, and she didn't even consider Naruto's character. Who knows what might happen if he inherited any of Carrie's troublemaking traits. Families with that bloodline wanted to establish ties with the royal family, and other nations desired the nature bloodline indefinitely. Half of the world will most likely visit Titan since Naruto could have as many wives as he desired. There were simply too many people for that. Before anyone discovered Diamond's prince, she had to establish some fundamental guidelines. In fact, that was the primary reason she called this meeting. She preferred a future queen who was native to Diamonds, even though the council will undoubtedly favor their own family. Nevertheless, she wished that this could have been postponed, if only until Naruto had had time to sort out his thoughts. She might be able to buy him some time with this meeting. 2 months ought to be sufficient. Well, in any case, the next school year begins in a little over 3 months. Yes, his wife ought to be educated, particularly about this nation. The girls should arrive a couple of days in advance, perhaps 2 or 3 weeks. Additionally, the numbers needed to be under control. A maximum of 3 girls and a small group of escorts may be sent by each group. Before someone has the brilliant idea to send 50 girls as escorts, it would be better to make sure that the escorts are also limited. Well, 10 escorts ought to be sufficient for 3 girls. In this manner, 3 adults can care for 1 girl while 1 can assist them with other tasks. Any girl can be added or removed by Naruto at any time. In order for Naruto to see the girls and for them to meet Naruto, there should be a party to introduce them. It would be best to have this celebration 5 days prior to the start of classes. Naruto could adjust to his family and his role as a prince until then. Meanwhile, the boy, whose future was so hotly debated, had gone to sleep. In addition to a few anecdotes about his great-grandmother that she would never have shared with anyone, his company and guards had already told him everything they knew or had heard about his grandmother. Naruto hardly remembered to send someone to those girls who had played hide and seek with him because he had nothing else to do and no more stories to hear to ensure they weren't concerned. It's odd how this morning feels like it happened forever ago. The queen scarcely recalled her previous visit. What time was it? 30 years ago? Or 40? It made no difference. It wasn't like she allowed this place to take root or anything. Her ministers were taking good care of the education of the young elites. Nevertheless, she felt bad for ignoring this location for so long. As she approached the youthful and visibly anxious ninjas, she was forced to hire bodyguards for Naruto before his existence and ancestry were widely known. The poor woman almost had a heart attack when she had greeted Sayuri. However, she recovered quickly and presented her charges with joy and a hint of pride. Like Anbu in Konoha, Sayuri was the director of Titan's elites. The crystals waited for her orders, or an explanation as to why the queen personally traveled to headquarters rather than assigning her missions to Sayuri as she usually did. Something important came up. I need a few of your best, maybe 10 or so high-profile bodyguard mission for quite a few years, no ties to any faction, that could hope to take the throne after my death, preferably on the young side, maybe around 16 or younger, Queen Sari said to Sayuri as she glanced over the rows of ninja and spoke loud enough for all crystals to hear. Sayuri could not speak 10 crystals. Years? Only faithful to the royal family? What in the world was happening? And since when has anyone, let alone the queen herself, discussed the impending catastrophe following her passing? First things first, then Sayuri called out, "Step forward. Kazami Sona, Rika Kanaki, Miyuki Nanoka, Kaji Suzuki, Ayame Yashako, Kyoko Akame, Tariko Yamada, Mariko Yamada, Haruhi Makani, and Mizuki," after mentally compiling a list of crystals that would fit the requirements. Naturally, none of the crystals expressed their confusion about the mission parameters. Still trying to hide their bewilderment, the 10 girls lined up in front of Sayuri and the queen and bowed. The queen examined them while the others departed. Kaji was quite tall, perhaps 17 years old, and appeared somewhat dark with her long black hair and dark brown eyes, whereas Kazami was somewhat petite and appeared to be 15 years old. One wondered why Ayame was a ninja in the first place because of her maternal softness. Unusually for a 16-year-old in front of a leader, she was totally composed and at ease. Kyoko was a nervous wreck next to her, and she made a valiant but unsuccessful attempt to hide it. Not shocking for someone who was only 15. Rika, who was also 15, was very serious and focused. Miyuki, on the other side, smiled at the queen. Since few 14-year-olds can receive a mission from the queen herself, she would give it her all regardless of the mission. The 15-year-old twins Tariko and Mariko gazed expectantly at the queen for guidance. The 16-year-old Haruhi was too shy to even look up from the floor, and she was too preoccupied with calming herself down to actually listen. Maya was the only one who looked curiously from Sayuri to the queen and back, not even trying to hide her bewilderment. At 17, Maya was the eldest, 2 months ahead of Kaji. Queen Sari was certain that these 10 young women would make excellent Naruto bodyguards and would probably end up becoming his friends as well. The queen turned on the privacy seals as the whole procession proceeded to a tiny office for the briefing. By now, none of the girls nor Sayuri bothered to hide their curiosity, so the queen explained, "All right, you are too young to remember my daughter Carrie, so I will start over 40 years ago. My husband and I only had one child, Carrie, and when she was 18, she wanted to see the world before settling down and take over the throne. She ran away and left a letter that she wanted a few adventures, but would be back before she turned 30. We understood that she wanted to see the world in her young years, so we let her go and didn't try to bring her back. Instead, we waited and waited and waited and waited some more. But at some point Carrie's 30th birthday came and left, and Carrie still wasn't back. Naturally we were worried, even though we knew she was more than strong enough to take care of herself. A lot of our best went to investigate, but lost her trail on the southern shore of fire. We had no choice but believe that Carrie died on the ocean. The trail ended 3 years after her departure from Titan. By the time we found out where she went missing, she was already gone for over 12 years, and we had to assume she was dead since that time. I don't know what exactly happened or why she didn't come back, but it is for sure that Carrie survived back then and somehow ended up with the daimyo of Whirlpool. They had at least one daughter, my granddaughter Kushina Uzumaki. Somehow this Kushina ended up in Konoha, the ninja village of fire, and had a child with the 4th Hokage, a 12-year-old boy, Naruto Uzumaki, my great-grandson and heir. You were to guard and protect him at all times, preferable become his friend as well. The room fell silent as everyone tried to process what had been said. The implications particularly made Sayuri feel lightheaded. She still recalls the grief for Carrie that was evident on the Queen's face at the time, as well as the anxiety about what would happen and who would lead Diamond following Queen Sari's death. She was a member of the search party for Carrie at the time every year. That concern increased and lingered in the back of everyone's mind as they understood the consequences of not having an heir. Even though the girls were unaware of Naruto's political importance, they were well aware of the honor they would receive for protecting Diamond's heir. They couldn't agree quickly enough, of course. So, without even packing, they all went to the palace. Just to see the young prince, Sayuri went along following a brief stroll. They entered the palace and found themselves facing a 12-year-old boy who was sound asleep. The queen's 2 guards, who had been keeping watch over him, rose for a quiet salutation. The queen simply carried Naruto to one of the guest rooms, his new guards following silently, since no one wanted to wake him. In contrast, Sayuri had had enough. She left the palace and headed home with a faint smile and a heart as light as a feather. Naruto woke up the following morning feeling very lightheaded and looked around. No, he was already accustomed to it, but he had no idea where he was. He had never slept in one place twice since fleeing Konoha. Thus, it didn't worry Naruto or cause him to lose his sleep. However, it appears that the girls were completely unconscious on the floor. Other girls were just standing around doing nothing at all, not even sleeping. Who were they? Why had they come here, apart from lounging or resting? And just where was this place? That question felt a little familiar. Naruto suddenly recalled the day before, and a few things began to make sense. The large room and the plush bed. When he dozed off, he was still in the palace, where his great-grandmother had placed him. However, that didn't explain why there were so many girls in his room or why some of them were dozing off on the floor. "Good morning, Your Majesty," chirped one of the girls as soon as she realized Naruto was awake. Everyone else turned around as a result, and those on the floor got up to meet him. The ensuing silence was deafening after such a boisterous greeting. Naruto answered, Good morning as well. Whoever you are." The youngest girl grinned and pointed to each of the girls as she said their names, saying, "Oh. Of course. The introductions, I'm sorry, I forgot it. I'm Miyuki and these are Kazami, Rika, Kaji, Ayame, Kyoko, Tariko, Mariko, Haruhi, and Maya." Naruto smiled and said, "Nice to meet you," while making sure his blanket would cover his privates. He glanced to check the exact amount of clothing he was wearing, and took another to confirm that he was indeed naked. "I hope the girls didn't notice him taking off his clothes." Naruto quickly prayed to Kami that whoever had taken his clothes was a man, which was unlikely given the abundance of men in the area. Then he looked around once more, hoping to find something, anything, to wear. He noticed a few garments on the chair, a kimono, apparently, but not his own jumpsuit. Fortunately for men, it was blue, rather attractive, and sadly too far from the bed to reach without showing those girls. Naruto said, "Do you mind waiting outside, so I can get dressed?" "My apologies, we are to guard you, therefore we have to stay in the same room as you. But we could turn around if you liked," replied Rika. "Guards? How could he possibly need guards? Even more so when he was dressing?" The reason why girls were sleeping in his room was at least clarified. Why they did so on the floor, however, is not clear. Naruto informed them, "Yeah, I would prefer some privacy." Before one of the girls attempted to peek, he hurried over to his kimono and put it on. After they turned away from him, some toward the door and others toward the windows. After he had finished, he replied, "Okay, you can look again now. Do any of you know where we can get breakfast?" This time Ayame responded, "Actually, the queen wanted to see your highness. Once woken up I was under the impression that she wanted to take her meal together with you and discuss something." When he was still in the orphanage, Naruto was thrilled to learn that he would be eating with his own family, something he had always dreamed of. He simply nodded and smiled at the girls, who followed his cue and escorted him to a spacious room inside the castle. His great-grandmother and 2 other people were the only people in the nearly empty room, along with a large desk and several chairs. "Mornin' Gran," was Naruto's delicate and subtle way of requesting Queen Sari's attention. At least it was successful. "Good morning, Naruto, did you sleep well?" the queen asked, rising to her feet and grinning at the new arrival. "Yeah, I slept great. Waking up was kind of weird though," he replied. "Say Gran, why did you put guards in my room?" "I traveled from Konoha to Titan on my own. I can look after myself." Naruto complained, "Well, obviously you can't defend yourself while sleeping. That aside, you're now the crown prince of Diamond and my only heir. A lot of people will want your head once your status gets known." Even an accident would be a catastrophe, because if we lose our last heir, we may end up with a civil war. Before you came, we actually expected a war in 2 or 3 years and couldn't do anything to prevent it. Without an heir, different groups will try to seize power and fight each other. Now that we have a chance to avoid this, I will make sure to keep you safe. Therefore, the bodyguards think of it as a family tradition. Your grandmother Carrie and I also had bodyguards when we were your age. The queen patiently explained for a moment. Naruto didn't believe it, however. His stomach responded with a loud, irate growl before he could say anything about it with a simple smile. The queen asked naively, "Would you like to get breakfast?" Naruto had no choice but to nod and laugh sheepishly. Since Naruto still had only the items he had carried when he fled, the queen coerced him to go shopping in the afternoon while they were all in the dining room. He would first have to choose which room he wanted after taking a tour of the castle. He hoped that by the end of the tour, his great-grandfather would return. It was Naruto's hope. He was afraid to find out what the queen thought of his bare minimum of necessities. After she ordered 20 servants and 4 carriages to carry them, it meant clothing and a kunai to him. The queen might be more at ease if her husband were present in order to train other jutsus of the Forbidden Scroll. He could request training from both, or at the very least, a training room. It was a pretty quiet breakfast, as quiet as it could get with 14 people eating. No one spoke, not even Naruto, even though it wasn't ramen. The food was so delicious that he was too shocked to speak. After everyone had finished, Naruto's tour was initiated by Queen Sari. Naruto was allowed to use his own bedroom first. The queen then gave him a tour of several rooms. Naruto refused to enter the first room, which was pink and had belonged to his grandmother Carrie when she lived in Titan. Naruto simply selected the room with the best view because there wasn't much of a difference between the others. His decision had nothing to do with the seal he saw on one of the paintings, which he knew would take him to the basement. He had no intention of leaving, but it might be useful to have a secret passage. In addition, it was big enough for training. When he returned from Grand's shopping trip, he could actually walk around the room a few times. The group dispersed after he made his selection. The rest of Naruto's guards would remain with him while a few brought their belongings into the room. After placing the Forbidden Scroll in this room, a servant was summoned to wait in the foyer for the outcome of their shopping expedition and bring everything inside. Naruto was more interested in the other rooms. In addition to the dining area, kitchen, restrooms, and training hall, there is a sizable library with a sizable jutsu section, a lovely garden, a pool area, complete with slides, and a horse stable. He was certain to despise the room before the week was out. There, he would learn about Diamond's history and customs, politics in general, manners, decorum, strategy, geography, and any other subject his teachers thought needed improvement. Naruto was certain that he would detest it because of his poor academy grades. He therefore made an effort to convince his grandmother that he was finished with school and that there was no real need. However, the queen merely chuckled and clarified that Titan Academy students could study for 5 years and begin in a higher position if they decided to continue after the 3 years. Naruto was required to attend those 5 years because he was a member of Diamond's royal family. In addition, in order to become a good king, he would need to learn more about his nation. Naruto was unsure of how to react to this. He had long aspired to be Hokage, but it was clear that was no longer an option. But ascending to the throne, he had no desire to interact with the people of Diamond if they were similar to those in Konoha. He also had no intention of disclosing to anyone the precise reason he left Konoha. Who could predict his family's opinion of him? "Hello, Sari-chan. Why did you send Tari to me? It's not like I was gone for too long. It wasn't even a full day, and you said before it wouldn't be a problem. What's the matter?" A deep voice interrupted him before he could delve further into these sinister thoughts. Naruto blinked and raised his head to see an elderly, large man wearing a kimono that resembled the one he was wearing. The man was likely as old as the Hokage, but he still had a lot of muscles and more hair. He appeared to pout a little and ignored everyone but the queen. Was his great-grandfather this man? The queen was filled with joy. "Welcome back, dear. I wanted to introduce someone to you. This is Naruto Uzumaki, son of Minato Namikaze and Kushina Uzumaki and grandson of our dear Kira. Naruto, this is Sure, my husband and your great-grandfather." For an eternity, Sure froze, staring at his wife and wondering if she was playing a trick on him. She never faltered. He came to the realization that she was extremely serious. In any case, she wouldn't make a joke about this, so he turned back to his newly found family, very slowly, very carefully, and probably looking like a drugged psychopath, and was left speechless by Naruto's smile, which was strikingly similar to both Kira's and his own. Sure wanted to say a million things, including how glad he was to meet Naruto, how much Naruto would enjoy being here, how the entire nation would rejoice over his arrival, and much more. I wanted to ask him even more questions, such as how he got here, how he liked it here, whether or not he has been treated well by people thus far, where he is from, how old he is, what his favorite things are, and so on. His mouth made the decision to say, hi, on its own because his brain was so confused about what to say. Despite the brief greeting, Naruto's smile widened even more. Hi, Gigi. Do you want to come shopping with us? Gran said, you could help us. He responded. Sure laughed clearly and loudly, and he was much more at ease than he had ever been. It appears that Naruto not only inherited Kira's smile but also her penchant for nicknames. Sure. I can't let my great-grandson get scared for life because of Sari's shopping habits. When are we going? Sure chuckled in spite of her somewhat irritated expression. The woman replied, we wanted to go after finishing Naruto's tour through the castle, but we got to the most important rooms already, so if you like, we can go now and let Naruto explore the rest later. Everyone nodded, and they got ready to go. What about the preparations they needed to make? Naruto was furious about all the trouble they were having for a mere shopping walk. To start, they summoned some bodyguards for Gran. Only a small portion of her guards were included in the 7 escorts. After that, a large carriage, with a driver, needed to be prepared. The queen dispatched a few, 16, servants to carry the items they were going to purchase. In the interim, it would take some time for his family to adjust. He realized if Gran purchased the bare minimum of necessities in this manner, he would undoubtedly be extremely busy whenever she made a large purchase. After 3 hours, Naruto eventually took a seat in the carriage, and the entire procession started to head for the city. The queen rarely left the palace, and when she did, it was for a political meeting, leaving the populace rather perplexed. Her husband, the king, preferred to take casual walks in the city, but he usually did so by himself or with close companions. It has been 20 years since they last went shopping together. There were significantly fewer servants and bodyguards even back then. Many of the bodyguards were quite young. As if that weren't strange enough, no one questioned their skills. But why the abrupt shift? The young child seated between the royal couple, however, was the most peculiar of all. Who was he? What made him a member of the royal family? As a result, everyone looked at the procession, and Naruto in particular, with more or less open eyes. The attention didn't seem to bother the prince himself. Heck, he would also stare if a crowd that big passed in front of him. They reached the first store, a closet, after 30 minutes and numerous bows. It was specifically a store selling very high-quality kimonos. Following a bow, the vendor personally approached the queen and inquired about how he could be of assistance. Well, first he needs some casual clothes. 30 sets should do for the beginning, then 10 sets for training and another 10 for official business of varying degree of importance, Sari said, pointing to Naruto. After having already prepared a list, the vendor would have pondered the peculiar circumstance, but he was too joyful to give a damn at the moment. After all, he wasn't able to sell 50 full outfits every day, and the queen's taste was pricey. The vendor then escorted them all to the male area. Since foreigners, who were typically already adults, were the only men who purchased kimonos here, he would have to change each and every one of them. Naruto scanned his surroundings, taking in all the lovely and pricey kimonos. He would never have thought to wear one a week ago, and now his Gran was going to buy him more than some clans had. To the annoyance of Gran, Gigi was already in a chair and halfway to dreamland. For his part, Naruto simply grinned and searched for some clothing that he wanted. It was a tough choice because almost everything there was lovely. Naruto ultimately selected a set of blue, orange, and black kimonos for whatever causal situations Gran referred to. It was simple to choose training attire because the vendor simply brought a number of sets that he thought were the most comfortable and form-fitting. The prince put on the ones he liked best and stretched them to see if they would limit his range of motion. The real trouble began when 10 form-fitting kimonos were selected. What kind of official business a prince would have to handle made Naruto extremely frightened. He was a ninja, not a stupid Christmas tree, and the clothes alone were starting to irritate him. One offered kimono, for instance, had pink diamonds sewn all over it. Naturally, Naruto wouldn't even try it. It took him 3 hours to put on another one because it had so many layers. However, some were truly amazing, such as a kimono with flames printed at the bottom and another that shimmered like a rainbow. Fortunately, Naruto's choice of underwear was not snubbed by the queen. After 4 hours, he finished his clothes shopping by gathering a few boxers and socks. Unfortunately, Gran's bare minimum of necessities still could not be met with the 50 kimonos. The next destination, of all places, was a bookshop. Naruto was already extremely irritated and somewhat worn out from the dressing marathon before he had even entered the building. However, it is understandable that his Gigi was alert following his 4-hour slumber. Fortunately, Naruto had little work to do in the bookstore. He thus followed Gigi's example and dozed off during the entire event. His great-grandparents simply took the books because they believed the prince would benefit from them. Books on politics, leadership, chakra, history, and other subjects he would need to learn were chosen by Grand Gigi picked out the whole Icha Icha series, along with a few other adult novels that are more or less graphic, as well as some typical adventure books. Only 12. That's hardly acceptable literature for Naruto. Not even on the off chance that's actually legal. What are you thinking? Exclamation mark quote, said Naruto. Awakened by the queen's displeasure at her husband's choices, the king responded, essentially ending their argument. Oh, come on. You know, I wouldn't do this without a reason. If he gets interested in girls early, it will make a lot of things far easier. Then we can discuss with him about his choices and give him some advice. Naruto himself was curious about what his Gigi did, but he soon forgot it after learning that a toy store would be the next stop. The royal family's visit and the fact that they let the boy have anything he wanted were beyond the comprehension of the store's vendor. He simply stood there, staring in disbelief as a dozen servants gathered the items and a very happy blonde boy pointed to half of his inventory. Since Naruto rarely had toys and his family now bought him everything he desired, it goes without saying that he had a great time. Perhaps this shopping binge wasn't as horrible as it seemed. After asking his bodyguards what their favorite games were, Naruto purchased the necessary supplies and assured his girls that they would play with them. The final store, a weapons store, was the best part, though since swords are so awesome, having one was essential naturally. Shuriken and kunai were purchased in great quantities. The training equipment then arrived, including 2 training swords, 100 training dummies, a few sports items like punch bags, climbing ropes, and trampolines, 50 ma squared of mats, 20 automatic targets that moved in various patterns, various balls, and other items. For example, Sir got weights for almost every body part, and no joke, he even got one for the part that defines a mana and told Naruto bluntly that he would be grateful for it when he grew up. At the moment, his only gratitude was that his grandmother didn't notice. Naruto at last remembered to ask Gran for training in the store. With tears in her eyes, she agreed and said she would get him a teacher the very next day. They returned to the palace. Once everything was finished, Queen Sari immediately went to her documents and requested that Sure locate instructors for the prince, not only for instruction but also for knowledge and other purposes. Naruto had the evening free to play with his new toys and put away everything because his family was busy. Even though the bodyguards would never leave him, he was at last content with that. He was lonely enough to last 7 lifetimes. Therefore, when some of them followed him into his bed or the bathroom, Naruto didn't even raise a fuss. Yes, it would take some getting used to being a prince, but his family found it to be worthwhile. It wasn't just Naruto who had to get used to unfamiliar family members. The entire Hyuga clan was in a frenzy right now in Konoha since Naruto's departure. Hinata had changed, yes, practically all of them wished for her to change, but not into a troublemaker. For a week, Hinata didn't even leave her room to eat. If she hadn't had her own private bathroom, she most likely would have perished from thirst. Inoichi Yamanaka's yelling, comforting, threatening, and assistance did not elicit any response in that order. Hiyashi had attempted. One of the elders even made a violent attempt to remove her after Hinata shut down all of his tenketsu and threw him out of her window. He ended up in the hospital. Even though team assignments were postponed for a week, she nearly missed them. She eventually got out after a fight with Hanabi. Her younger sibling had heard 2 villagers discussing Naruto and the real reason he left. The young girl naturally thought that the adults were correct when they said that he and the Kyuubi were the same. Thus, she informed Hinata that no one ought to weep for a demon. When Hiyashi happened to be close to them and heard Hanabi, he turned a sickly green. He was obviously afraid of losing his daughters to the law of the third. However, he saw something much more terrifying than the Kyuubi before he could even open his mouth, glaring at her younger sister. Hinata slammed her door open. She defeated her in 2 seconds using only physical force, more accuracy than Hiyashi could muster, and no chakra at all. Everyone was terrified as Hinata marched into the Hokage Tower from the Hyuga compound after Hanabi passed out. She didn't even acknowledge the secretary, let alone request an appointment. Rather than ignoring the Jonins and Anbus already present, she simply entered the Hokage's office and yelled at him loudly enough for the entire village to hear. About the injustice done to Naruto, about how he suffered the entire time, about how she believed his beloved Gigi was meant to protect him. If the Hokage wasn't simply relieved that someone cared about Naruto, he would be incensed that a young child would yell at him in front of his finest ninjas. It had nothing to do with the fact that she was entirely correct. He had no idea that it would be a long time before anyone heard her voice again, because Hinata stopped talking to people after this. Not at her home, not at training, not at the mission, not at the Genin team's introduction, and not anywhere else. Most people left her alone. While some made jokes about how hoarse she was now and others tried to lift her spirits, Naruto would speak again if she was located, but if not, she wasn't that significant anyhow, correct? Before his family, Naruto believed they were worth studying. However, now he was no longer so certain. The schedule for the upcoming weeks had just been given to him by Queen Sari, and it included politics. History, crap. Geography, perhaps even helpful if he wanted to flee his classes. Etiquette, what is that? Writing, why would he need this? And much more. It took everything he had not to cry or try to flee. Thus, Naruto took the only action that came to mind. He countered, but, can't you let me have a bit more time for myself? I still want to learn some cool new jutsus. I never found the time to learn more than Kagebushin from my scroll. Astonished, Gigi interrupted, you know Kagebushin? With caution, Naruto replied, yeah. This inspired the monarch to propose. Then, how about this? You make as many clones as you can and the clones go to your lessons. That way you can do what you want and still learn everything when your clones vanish, as long as you make more than one clone. You could even learn more that way, because the first clone can learn about one thing while another learns something different. Thought the original. You should still train strength and stamina and such, because you can't receive physical training from a clone. How does this sound? Naruto was overjoyed. He can have much less work if he lets his clones handle the tedious tasks. His family was unquestionably the best in history. As a result, the queen told all of Naruto's teachers that they would each receive a clone and would probably work simultaneously since it would still function. None of them had any issues with it. The clones of Naruto were the only ones who were unhappy with the arrangement. Even sleeping through their classes would be impossible for them. The worst were private lessons, and so it started. Most of Naruto's clones were instructed in a variety of subjects while he trained with his weights or ran laps around the training hall in order for the extras to learn new jutsus from the Forbidden Scroll. He created more clones than he had teachers at last. When teachers weren't being cruel to him, the clones found learning this material to be genuinely enjoyable, which shocked both them and the teachers. And his instructors regarding the prince's glaringly inadequate education. He was illiterate, yes, he was familiar with most hiragana and a few kanji, and he was able to deduce the meaning of the text from its context. But that's not really how he could learn. For crying out loud, the boy was 12. By now, he ought to have completed at least 6 years of education. One of his old instructors must have recognized this and ought to have assisted him. The prince couldn't even be at fault. He was incredibly intelligent and picked things up quickly as long as they were explained. Everything was so weird. The teachers made a decision. If at all possible, they would make the lesson hands-on, such as using dancing for manners or shogi for strategy. Certain classes, such as writing, kenjutsu, taijutsu, ninjutsu, and a few others, were primarily practical anyhow. Instead of having the prince read about the topic, the teacher would simply explain it to him. If this couldn't be done, however, it was the history teacher who would teach Naruto to read. They would also ask the queen, who had previously instructed the prince, after classes to disregard a pupil who was illiterate. What were they contemplating? And why did the authorities allow those individuals to instruct any child, much less the Prince of Diamond? Despite this setback, they were all astounded by the prince's development in a single day. He learned 8 ninjutsus, 2 kenjutsu katas, 5 taijutsu katas, 3 dances, and basic math that would typically take 2 weeks to master. He also learned to read in 30 minutes and write in another. He also excelled in his other classes. Naruto was equally astounded. This stuff was simple and enjoyable. No dull reading text lectures that didn't make sense. No explanations that no one could comprehend without requesting a simplified version from a parent or instructor. He gave the wrong answer, so there's no need to wait outside. No other students make fun of him because he messed up. Not at all. Simply conversing and listening about interesting subjects. Etiquette was surprisingly fascinating as well. He never thought that someone holding his dancing partner 5 centimeters too close would spark a conflict. His favorite subject was rapidly evolving into strategy. They spent the entire day playing a game. Naruto even received praise for it. Hell, he couldn't recall if he had ever received praise in Konoha. However, even for playing a game, his teachers gave him a lot of praise. Naruto already enjoyed the topic of leadership. He was eagerly anticipating the next lesson. Even though most children probably never learn things like that, he never imagined the day would come when he would have to wait for a lesson to begin. He and his teacher had begun reading faces today in order for him to recognize when someone was attempting to deceive or take advantage of him. At last, Naruto comprehended. He could see why Sakura would give him a smile one moment and then punch him the next. He could see why Hinata would flush at the sight of him. Oh, how mistaken his earlier assumption had been. Rewind. What can you see on this scene? Asked Suzura, the leadership instructor, pointing to a particular image. There was a pretty girl, maybe 15 years old. A boy offered her some flowers after she smiled at him. Her smile somehow made Naruto think of Sakura. It's likely that the boy liked the girl and asked her out because he looked both hopeful and embarrassed. She was grinning too, so she would probably agree. He had once heard the Hokage say that a girl who liked the boy smiled a lot at him even if she doesn't acknowledge that she likes him. The reason Naruto had repeatedly asked Sakura out was because, as he had explained, most young girls fear rejection so much that they cover up their interest. For example, they are mean to the one Especially in public, sometimes they even go so far as to pretend they're interested in someone else, just to hide their feelings. She would frequently give him a smile before punching him, as if she knew people were watching. Naruto made an effort to let her know that he liked her in return and that it was acceptable for them to be friends or more if she so desired. He had sorely desired a friend back then, not that it was ever successful. Well, I think, the boy just asked the girl out, because he has flowers for her and looks at her expecting and hopeful, but also a bit embarrassed. The girl seems happy to get asked and will probably agree. Naruto finally concluded, "Almost, my prince, you're absolutely right about the boy. He just asked her out on a date." But the girl's smile is artificial. Look. Her jaw is very stiff and her eyes as well. That happens when somebody forces an expression on his or her face that would not be there naturally. She will reject the boy for sure, most likely in a very blunt and brutal way, Suzuha said. Then why pretend to be happy about getting asked out? Asked Naruto, perplexed. Hesitantly the instructor responded, I'm not sure, maybe to give the boy hope before shooting him down, or maybe to pretend to be nice without making the effort to see things from his point. It depends on their relationship before. So much for Sakura's liking him. Then every time he had asked her out, she most likely laughed heartily, and for 2 years, that was nearly every day. How time wasting. In any case, he doubted he would ever see her again, so it didn't matter. It was probably best that way. Suzuha just took the next photo without realizing that she had just caught the prince off guard. In this instance, a girl observed a boy train. The boy was too preoccupied with throwing kunai to notice or care. The girl pressed her hand over her impressive copyright Coletta copyright and watched him with a very red face. Naruto thought of her as Hinata, red hues that are similar. The prince asked more questions than he answered. Well, the boy trains and doesn't mind the girl. The girl wants to train too, but can't because of her fever, he said. Suzuha laughed. Not really, the boy probably hasn't noticed the girl, and the girl doesn't have a fever. She is blushing because she likes the boy. See, she pays more attention to him than to his kunai and put her hand close to her heart. She is probably rather shy. When a girl sees a boy that she loves, her eyes become really soft, like she loses her focus. And her gaze follow the boy everywhere, as if nothing else even exists. That also applies to confident girls. Some shy girls quickly look away when their special boy notices them, so you should look for expressions to read. When the person think you aren't looking that way, it will be far easier to get an opinion of a person. The results will also be closer to the truth this way, not only with girls and their feelings. With Hinata in mind, Naruto questioned, so what would she be like if the boy asked her out? Suzuha-sensei? Interesting question. I think she would turn completely red, maybe even get weak at the knees, but in the end she would agree for sure, she replied. The prince was a little perplexed by this point. Hinata had no justification for being bashful. She might as well have been his first, best, and only friend. He had sorely desired a friend back then. Well, it was official. Girls are completely nonsensical. Class wasn't over yet, but Naruto was still in disbelief over all of this information. He simply took the next photo, putting these ideas in the back of his mind for later. End of flashback. What about revelations? The only thing that surprised Naruto more was that, when the text made sense, he actually enjoyed reading and going to school. Shikamaru had a lot of questions in Konoha when it came to Naruto. Many adults had never made much sense, but this was crazy. Most of them hailed his departure as a triumph. His antics weren't that bad, really. The majority were even funny. After 2 weeks of contemplating Naruto's departure and the peculiar reactions, Shikamaru had yet to make any headway. Heck, he had yet to develop a theory that could account for both Naruto's friendship with the Hokage and his conflicts with the majority of the village. It made him go crazy. His own father was also behaving strangely. Shikamaru did anticipate that he would be concerned about any Konoha ninja, but even though he was a Jonin, he seemed almost traumatized by Naruto. It simply couldn't be. Correct? Naruto was merely a genin. After all, he wasn't even a genin, in fact, because he once more failed the test. Shikamaru initially believed that the adults were scarred because Konoha had misplaced a significant scroll. However, this belief was disregarded when Iruka-sensei told everyone that Naruto could only be confronted by Jonin or Anbu. He should be informed by everyone else that Mizuki's plot has been uncovered and that Naruto is free to return to the village. They are to let Naruto go and report back where they saw him. If he didn't believe this, they are never allowed to fight him or even hold him back. This was absurd. The guy was the weakest person in the entire class, for crying out loud. It was impossible for Naruto to be dangerous even with the scroll. Anbu's was the intended recipient of the scroll. He probably wouldn't even comprehend the content of the text. Then why? Why was one young boy who wasn't even a genin causing everyone to become so tense? And why in the world hadn't they found him yet? The search party had been spotted by Shikamaru. Almost every Jonin, Hunternin, and Anbus that was present in Konoha at the time the Hokage was smoking, and when he first saw the big group, he simply thought that he wanted some of the stuff. Later, when the group returned without Naruto or the scroll, he thought he had actually smoked that stuff. What the hell, really? Did half of the Aburame, Hyuga, and Inuzuka clans fail to find a single young boy? In addition to the dogs and Anbus, when the ninjas chased Naruto around after pulling a practical joke, he had always assumed they were teasing him. Apparently not, that is. Shikamaru told his father everything, but he was unable to extract any more information from the unruly man. He would have asked Hinata for more details, but he didn't want to offend her after the yelling she inflicted on the Hokage. All of this was so extremely problematic. It had been more than a decade since Sayuri had been on a mission. She was still extremely cautious since she had never been to Konoha before. She was very careful not to get caught. Yes, she could push her way out if she had to, and no elemental nation would attack Diamond anyhow. However, Sayuri didn't want to offend any of the prince's friends. Furthermore, no one in Konoha should yet be aware of Prince Naruto's location. He ought to share everything with his friends. It was simple enough to enter the village. All she needed to do now was locate the paperwork. Any documents pertaining to a person as significant as Prince Naruto would undoubtedly be found in the tower, which was Konoha's best protected location, most likely in the basement or one of the upper floors. Sayuri silently leapt to a window in the Hokage Tower and waited in the dimly lit office during an Anbus shift change. With as much stealth as a group of first-year academy students on a field trip, 2 Anbus of the new shift approached her in order to prevent them from raising the alarm. She thought about killing them but promptly changed their mind. Killing someone Naruto-sama liked would not be acceptable, and it was absurd to think that either of the Anbus would see her. They were too preoccupied with the newest rumors to notice anything else. Seriously, dog, I can't believe Hokage-sama still wants to search for the brat. I mean, one lucky hunter probably found him already the very first day and did everyone a long overdue favor, and hunters should be able to let a body disappear. I can understand Hokage-sama. After all, if the Jinchuriki ends up in Kumo, Iwa, or worse with Orochimaru, he would likely prepare to strike back at Konoha, possibly together with his new allies. And I for one can live without seeing the Kyuubi another time in his full glory. Thank you very much. Some like me just won't be able to relax until the boy is found. Rabbit. Right now I don't care if they find him alive or dead, as long as they do find him. Even the Hokage prefers Uzumaki dead to missing. I guess you're right, dog. After Mizuki's stunt, the brat probably wants nothing more than to get back at Konoha. Sayuri felt her heart pounding, not because she had a mission to fulfill. Not even because there might be significant political repercussions from this mission, nor because she could hear the heartbeats of enemy ninjas passing by. She was accustomed to such circumstances. No, there was only one word that chilled her to the bone. Uzumaki the prince was the subject of their conversation, and they'd rather he was dead than uncontrollable. The prince traveled alone and rarely discussed his past, which is understandable. Most likely, he fled from here. Had they said anything else? Mizuki's prank? Perhaps a significant event? What had happened would have to be revealed to her. They also mentioned the Kyuubi and referred to him as Jinchuriki. Generally speaking, the elemental nations were not strong enough to combat a Biju that might be the cause of their intense scarring from Naruto-sama. They were particularly concerned that Naruto-sama would wind up with Orochimaru, Kumo, or Iwa. Well, to the best of her knowledge, those were the groups that harbored resentment toward Konoha. They feared that, of course, they wouldn't want anyone with those groups. Alright. She was sufficiently composed now, always searching for some sort of archive. Sayuri crept from door to door. She discovered a promising room after more than 24 doors, 7 more patrols, and a lot of spider-filled hiding places. Those Konoha nins really ought to clean the tower a little more frequently or thoroughly, like in a library. There were shelves everywhere. However, they contained paperwork and boxes rather than books or scrolls. Sayuri silently shut the door. Those patrols wouldn't enter here. Even though she was now in complete darkness, they were just too indolent. She walked to the center of the room, her head still shaking, and read the titles of a few boxes to get a sense of the ordering process. A was near the door, and it was arranged by name. This, however, simplified things. Sayuri located the prince's documents, as well as those of any other Uzumaki and Namikaze. In a matter of seconds she chose to take a look while putting everything in sealing scrolls because she was shocked by the sheer number of documents about Naruto-sama. Perhaps she would discover a clue regarding the Mizuki's stunt that the first patrol had been discussing. But only decades of experience prevented her from completely destroying this entire village because of what she read, which was so repulsive, cruel, and just plain wrong. His only final wish was for Naruto-sama to be treated as a hero, as his own father was essentially one. However, the village preferred to have him put to death before his father's body had even cooled. He escaped 5 separate assassination attempts on the first day of his life. After the second try, He was supposed to recover from one of the doctor's treatments. There was little improvement in his medical records most of the time. He was injured in some way, mostly the types that a new ninja would encounter after barely surviving a mission that was misranked and ought to have been handled by an experienced ninja in the first place. At the age of 5, the council made the decision to expel him from the orphanage. Where the prince ought never to have been, the Hokage ought to have placed him in a secure location where he would receive the advancement that his position required, even in the absence of knowledge regarding Naruto-sama's relationship with Diamond. Since the Hokage gave the prince his mother's maiden name, it is clear that he was aware of his family in Uzu. In essence, the village allowed a 5-year-old to live alone while utterly disregarding not only the final request of their greatest hero but also appropriate protocol, fundamental human rights, and common sense. In a hostile setting, then he grumbled about his tricks. Another significant component of Naruto-sama's files was pranks. He had pulled more practical jokes than she had. Additionally, with greater success, a painted Hokage monument, an upside-down academy, and was disguised in orange paint, and roughly 200 pieces of pink lingerie with tiny Uchiha fans on them were among the images that made Sayuri smile. She wondered in the back of her mind if the lingerie had been pink before the trick. Even a few instances where the culprit was suspected by everyone but never proven were mentioned in Naruto-sama's file. A few psychological files and notes about his life were another fascinating aspect of his file. All of Naruto-sama's details, including his favorite food, ramen, his strange romantic interests, Hinata Hyuga's crush on him, his crush on Sakura Haruno, and an unfathomably long list of people who have a crush on Sasuke Uchiha, including Sakura Haruno, and Naruto-sama's jealousy of Sasuke Uchiha, his expected military prowess, high stamina and resilience, ninjutsu, probably not very obedient, and his dream, Hokage, had all been documented by the Sandaime. Sayuri dared not examine any of the council's recorded conversations regarding Naruto-sama. On principle, she would probably level the Hokage tower and blow up before she had finished the first page. Sayuri looked for reports of incidents that happened to the prince, mentally noting that she should stand back when the queen read that section, preferably with a mountain between them. She wanted to know the full name of this Mizuki fellow. Even though she probably shouldn't in this manner, she could look through the man's files for a report on his stunt. Fortunately, Sayuri had discovered the incident quickly for the umpteenth time this evening. However, what she discovered made her blood boil. To exploit any child in that manner, and not less from a teacher. The prince didn't mention this location, which makes sense. The Konoha Council's attempt to use this to execute Naruto-sama was actually the worst part. For crying out loud, they essentially attempted to murder a defenseless youngster for listening to his teacher. Those jerks. The other Namikaze and Uzumaki's files were much smaller, and Sayuri's readings while sealing them in scrolls were largely typical. Even though those ninjas were reportedly quite powerful for the elemental nations, the village's sins were still increased. The only heir to those clans had been mistreated by the village, after all. In fact, Naruto-sama's parents' files were the most fascinating of those. With blood and chakra seals, they each had a personalized letter for the prince and every jutsu scroll from their clan. Clever. Before the prince mastered chakra, no one could open those scrolls because the blood had to be from a descendant and might have come from the infant, but the chakra had to come from the same person as the blood, and by the time he discovered it, he was obviously old enough to comprehend the purpose of the scrolls and his claim to them well. The Yondaime was obviously a human nature expert and a loving father. Sayuri quietly left the tower after storing the final papers pertaining to Naruto-sama's inheritance. In a little while, she would pause in the prince's apartment and take whatever he had left. Perhaps she could use this to brighten his day. The apartment was surprisingly empty, apart from broken items, and Sayuri was unable to locate a single toy. Perhaps everything valuable has already been taken by the villagers. At least she discovered some pictures. The director of all crystals was returning to Diamond, her goals safely enshrined in her scrolls. As she read those files, she kept wondering what the queen would do. They beat Naruto beyond the beat, so much so that he didn't even gripe about his meal's vegetables, no matter how much fun he had. It was exhausting to learn in a single day what others had learned in 3 weeks, and for the foreseeable future, he would most likely study equal bulks daily. In fact, he was too exhausted to look around the basement or simply pull a practical joke. It must have been the first time in his life. Fortunately, dinner was small and quiet. Gran glanced at him occasionally but remained silent. Perhaps she felt guilty for forcing him to put in so much study time. Better than going over every lesson again. I suppose Naruto was not in the mood to describe his day. It would simply take an eternity. He wouldn't be able to elaborate, but he did truly enjoy today. Too much took place. Knowing how hard their prince worked today, even Naruto's guards remained silent, and they were all incredibly proud. Naturally, they had only safeguarded the original, but watching the prince work out for nearly a full day in addition, some of the girls passed a lot of Naruto clones when they switched shifts, and they all put in the same amount of effort as the first Prince Diamond would undoubtedly thrive under his tutelage. After supper, Queen Sari informed Naruto that while he was studying, his room had been renovated. Even though there are still some issues, the room was at least prepared for him, allowing him to recuperate and get some sleep that night. A little alarmed by the changes Gran had mentioned, Naruto dragged himself to his room. He opened the door, his fingers shaking, and prayed briefly that his room wasn't now too girly or pink. He dared to breathe again after taking one look around. Fortunately, his room still appeared to be tolerable, if not slightly better than it had. The carpet was light blue, like the sky, and clearly brand new to confirm that it is indeed incredibly soft and comfortable. Naruto gave it a quick pat. The color was the same on the wall as well, giving the impression that the room was hovering just above some clouds. Watching his guard enter, Naruto collapsed on his new bed. The desk, wardrobe, and bed were all much bigger than before. Fortunately, the paintings remained intact. A few shelves were added. Some were empty, while others were already stocked with books. 3 maids continued to place books on shelves. 2 maids placed his new kimonos in the wardrobe, and 2 more maids stored his guard's belongings. His toys were nowhere to be seen. They might have remained elsewhere. The young prince closed his mouth after opening it to offer assistance to the maids. Still, he was too exhausted to move. Even if they agreed, he probably wouldn't be able to help. However, what should be done? He was too physically and emotionally worn out to train, study, or explore, and it was still too early to go to bed. Additionally, he was unable to play games with any of his guards because his toys were elsewhere. Furthermore, it would be cruel to play while others toiled diligently to clean his room. His eyes followed one of the bookshelves around the room once more. Okay, today's class was enjoyable, and his history teacher did suggest a book that he thought would be interesting. Helping those girls was probably almost as good as working hard for school, so perhaps he ought to check it out to see if any good books were there. After all, his grandparents picked them. Naruto made up his mind and proceeded to the fullest shelf. Quickly perusing the titles, he glanced at a small orange book. Icha Paradise. Naruto was very interested in finding out if there was a place known as Paradise. Additionally, it had to be cool if it was only a short story for amusement aside from a book. It had to be good since his own grandparents chose it and it was on top of that orange, right? Hey ladies, does any one of you know a place called Icha Paradise? Replied Naruto. Everyone's attention was drawn to that, and everyone's heads were shaking. Not even the maids were aware of it. Never heard of such a book, but it sounds more like a romance than an actual place to me. Do you mind reading out loud? I'm kinda curious. That's a great idea, Miyuki. Maybe His Majesty could read it to us all, so it would be like a shared book. Said Ayame. He had only learned to read earlier today, and she was the only one of his guards who had noticed and wanted him to practice. When one of the girls asked the prince to read, he would most likely agree. If they all shared the book, she could then force the prince to practice more. Naruto nodded briefly, then started reading aloud as his guards settled in. Icha Paradise. The trip starts. A few of the guys appeared somewhat pleased with his leave, presumably because they now had a chance at the girls, or at least thought they did, and they were consoling the girls. The whole village came to see him off and wish him a safe journey. Of course, Rajija knew some of the girls would cry, but seeing tears in all those lovely eyes almost hurt physically. 2 of the younger girls vowed to stay virgin for him. It was very touching and definitely something to look forward to his return, but it was unavoidable. The world waited and he had always wanted to travel. After traveling for 2 hours, Rajija came across a young woman whose kimono was nearly destroyed and stuck in a tree stump, exposing her melon-sized, soft, and fair-complexioned bosom. Good evening, lovely lady, Rajija said. Why would a stunning woman like you go to such a perilous place? You should definitely stop wearing such ruined clothing, by the way. All right, I'm heading to see my sister O, and I appreciate the advice. Sir, I should have considered this earlier. What is your name, by the way? The slime figure was visible even in the dark, and the moon reflected on her round, fair breasts as she stepped out of her kimono and stood in the moonlight wearing only a bra and slip. The kimono was left forgotten on the forest floor. I'm Rajija, the world's bravest man, the charmer of women, and the hero of all children. And, my lovely young lady, who are you? Sakuya. All right, lovely. Would you like me to keep you warm this evening? A young woman shouldn't lift something so heavy, so perhaps I should help you carry your belongings. Sakuya gave her savior a shy smile and a small laugh, which typically portends a reward later that evening. Naruto was interrupted by a laugher before he could finish reading more than 2 pages. He looked up to see a very odd scene. Haruhi was unconscious with a face that could be described as neon scarlet. Maya, Kaji, Rika, and even Ayame's eyes twitching violently, and Mariko, and Miyuki were laughing even though Kyoko and Kazami's eyes appeared to try to escape their location and run for their lives. At least they were still conscious despite having extremely red faces. The maids who stored Naruto's belongings all reacted in a similar way. Even though those responses were diverse, Naruto wasn't prepared for any of them. He thought the book was so dull that he was certain at least one of them would nod off before the first chapter was finished. All he could hope was that it wasn't him. However, the story lacked both humor and excitement. Actually, nothing occurred. However, he had already come to the conclusion earlier that day that girls were completely nonsensical. Naruto-sama, please promise me that you will never be like that, Ayame begged. Like Rajija, the author of this so-called book was clearly never in any serious relationship, otherwise he would know better than to think, or write, women would like a behavior like Rajija showed. So you wouldn't like it, Ayame? No rational woman enjoys being disregarded, Kaji emphasized. But Rajija didn't ignore any women. He even talked to them, right Ayame? No, Naruto-sama, he bragged to them. He was mostly the only one who talked and he clearly didn't listen to any of them. There is a very huge difference. The small details usually show your true beliefs better than anything else, and far too often, they show the opposite of what those people say. For example, Rajija hears only pleas of girls, that they will stay virgin for him or say otherwise something flattering of him. No guy beside him had said anything. Also, Rajija had only asked intimate questions. Normal women don't answer those questions to strangers. Of course, there are women that don't understand the difference between being loved and desired, but any girl with enough sense of self-worth and who demands any standard of a potential boyfriend would at best ignore Rajia's questions. More likely though, they would beat him up for disrespecting their privacy. You still aren't exactly happy at being surrounded by us all the time, right? Well, just imagine we would have watched you getting dressed or bathing and then joked about the size of your member, just like Rajija made fun of Sakuya's breasts. My point exactly. Well, Ayame, at least it is funny to imagine how real woman would react to such a man. True Tariko, he would need a hospital before even closing his mouth. This book was totally incorrect. In addition to being pervy, Naruto was incredulous. The elderly daimyo in Whirlpool, meanwhile, also didn't think what he was reading was true. It was rare for the Queen of Diamond to interact with any of the elemental nations, let alone the smaller nations that surrounded them, so it was rather unusual for her to write a letter. However, it was not nearly as bizarre as what was written there. Dear Whirlpool Daimyo, a young boy arrived in Titan yesterday. An ancestor table seal was applied to the boy for reasons I would prefer not to disclose via mail. Unexpectedly, your name was listed among the results. Naruto Uzumaki is the boy's name. Attached are a few pictures of Naruto and a copy of the outcome. You have every right to demand custody of Naruto because you are more closely related to him than we are. However, we would like to talk about a potential arrangement because he is our only known heir. We want to know about our daughter Carrie as well. We want to know if she is okay because we have thought she is dead for more than 20 years. We won't pressure her to return to Diamond if she doesn't want to. All we want to know is what happened to her and if she is still alive. Well, and content. Kindly get in touch with us as soon as you can regarding Naruto and Carrie. Sincerely yours, Surei Shira is the King of Diamond, and Sari Shira is the Queen of Diamond. There were some pictures and a scroll beside the letter. Table of ancestors for Naruto Uzumaki, mother plus father child. Grandfather, mother, and grandmother grandfather, grandmother, and father. Kushina Uzumaki plus Minata Namikaze plus Naruto Uzumaki. Kari Uzumaki plus Sato Uzumaki. Kushina Uzumaki Jiraiya Kyushu plus Tsunade Senju plus Minata Namikaze. Sari Shira plus Surei Shira by Kari Uzumaki Uzumaki Sato. That is not possible. The Kyuubi attack claimed the life of Kushina's child. Furthermore, Rina, not Kari, was his wife. However, Rina had no recollection of her time in Whirlpool. Perhaps she was actually Diamond's queen's daughter. That would account for her endurance. Then, as soon as the daimyo saw the first image, all thoughts simply stopped. A young boy with blonde hair was spotted on a horse. His eyes and hair were Minato's, to be sure, but his face and especially his smile was Kushina. That boy was unquestionably his grandson. There was no need for the ancestor table and no space for disagreement. He needed to visit Diamond yesterday. Father, is something wrong? Kenshin, get an escort ready, at least 20 men there to prepare for travel to Titan in Diamond. We will decide there the length of our visit. It can be anything between 1 day and 3 weeks, and pack for yourself as well. Of course, but why all of a sudden? Somebody appeared in Titan, who looks a lot like Kushina and Minato. A 12-year-old boy, Naruto Uzumaki. His son left him faster than he could blink after he said, I will prepare everything immediately, most likely quicker than Minato's preferred jutsu as well. As he prepared for the lengthy journey, the daimyo also chuckled softly to himself. Hokage-sama, I have urgent news. The daimyo of Whirlpool was seen on his way towards the south. He may come to Konoha. When Izumo stormed into the Sandame's office, he made a valiant effort to maintain a normal appearance. He glanced at Chunin, who was panting heavily. There is no greater contrast between the young man and the elderly Kage. Izumo was bouncing and smiling maniacally. Clearly, he thought Whirlpool wanted to re-establish their long-standing friendship. In the meantime, the elderly man became more aware of his age. It had been more than 20 years since the daimyo of Whirlpool had left his home, but if the Hokage hadn't misled him about his grandson's survival, he would have arrived in Konoha 12 years ago. Or if he learned the truth later, however, he would have led his finest samurais in a march to Konoha. In any case, the loss of Kushina and Naruto nearly sparked a war, even though it was thought that Whirlpool would not benefit from winning such a conflict. The daimyo would realize right away that Naruto had been deceived if he managed to reach Iandril, because Naruto resembled the Yondaime too much. Everyone in Whirlpool would immediately recognize him and take him to see his grandfather. Everyone in Konoha saw the fox whenever they looked at the boy, which was the only reason no one had noticed it. The Hokage genuinely felt remorse for lying about Naruto's ancestry after 12 years of being certain to act in Konoha's best interests. He had desired that the boy remain near Konoha. That was the reason he shared so many stories about the Yondaime and gave the 3-year-old a glorified explanation of what a Hokage is, as well as why he attempted to act as a matchmaker between Naruto and that Haruno girl as expected. The young Naruto made the decision to become the greatest Hokage ever the very next day. The boy's family would not have attacked Konoha after discovering him if he had simply forged strong enough ties with the village. Or even remove him, as Naruto might come to despise them. The Uzumakis would never allow it to happen. Konoha would have retained their Jinchuriki and the Namikaze clan heir, and everything would have been ideal. The boy would have received his parents' sealed scrolls when he was old enough, and he would probably gain even more strength because Naruto Whirlpool would have restored trade routes and re-established the previous alliance. It would have been ideal. However, this plan had now backfired more violently than the combined force of the 9 Biju. The adults detested Naruto. The kids made it a contest to see who could be the meanest to him, and Sakura had used him as a punching bag. Naruto never made any friends. Only the Ichirakus, who viewed Naruto as their primary source of income, did not despise him. However, because he was the one who purposefully kept him away from his family, Naruto would ultimately despise him the most. He would quickly have his army at Konoha's doors if the daimyo of Whirlpool ever learned. Furthermore, the elderly Hokage was not foolish enough to think they could defeat this enemy. The Hokage calmly requested a thorough report. Even though his heart rate was racing and his ear was pounding with blood, he would require any information available to him. A carriage with around 20 Whirlpool samurais was signed 2 days ago on the eastern border. The carriage held the crest of the Uzumaki clan. They were heading south on the road towards fire. They even saw the Badose, Hokage-sama. I see. Tell the border patrol to let them through and inform me as soon as possible where exactly they are headed. Avoid any fights should the Uzumaki approach one of them. Be polite and answer them only with public information. The old Kage surveyed Konoha after Izumo left in silence. He prayed that the Uzumaki would either pass through fire or head to the capital, and that Naruto would never be seen by them. They clearly didn't know about Naruto yet because they didn't bring their army. Perhaps Konoha would remain fortunate, tranquil, and undamaged. Well, other than waiting and praying, there was nothing he could do at the moment. In the Mojimi clan meeting room, Tenchi, the leader of the clan, had never discussed politics with Moriko before. Yes, she had occasionally questioned her about the topics covered at the most recent council meeting. All she ever heard, though, was that she should enjoy her youth or some other non-reaction that was equivalent. It was hard for her to argue with. She wasn't the heir, after all, and she wasn't even close to taking over as clan leader. Therefore, no political knowledge was required, which added to the strangeness of this encounter. Nor was Tenshi-sama's appearance particularly helpful. She appeared to be in an odd mood. She looked more optimistic than Moriko had ever seen her, but anxious, too. It was really strange. That was made even more apparent by the fact that other powerful clan members were also anticipating little Moriko. Good evening, Tenshi-sama. You called for me? Yes, please take a seat. Moriko-chan, what I am about to tell you is still very secret, but it will be made public no later than 2 weeks from now. It is crucial that you only discuss it with the people present in this room, at least until the formal announcement. I don't know if the queen was surprised by him or if he was hidden for his protection, but it seems like she still had a male heir somewhere. In any case, her great-grandson Prince Naruto Uzumaki now resides in the palace. He is about your age and will be in your year at the academy. The classes will likely change, but you will still be the closest member of our clan to him. Therefore, I want you to be friends with the prince. If you are able to make more friends, that's great, but it's not really necessary. As long as he lives long enough, he will have enough girls to choose from, so his line shouldn't be in danger. Your year will also see a few more children because other countries will receive notes about the prince along with invitations for some of their girls. who are given the chance to become Prince Naruto's wives, though he ultimately makes the final decision. The first of your 3 goals is to become the prince's friend, which will likely be the most difficult because everyone will try the same. The second is to make sure you will make a good king, which you can do by teaching him about Diamond's customs or important subjects. This will likely be the easiest because most adults, including the queen, will assist him in this. The final goal is to make sure he has good wives, which essentially means you look more closely at his favorites and help those who are likely to be good queens and supportive wives. You will also show me all the information you have on the others, and if you can, the prince, and I will forward it to the queen and the council. It's crucial for our clan and the entire nation, and if the prince chooses self-centered wives, it could be disastrous for his family, our clan, and all of Diamond. Do you understand that everyone in this room, including myself, will prioritize helping you achieve your goals? Moriko remains stunned by all of this information. A boy with the bloodline of nature? Not even the future king? Additionally, she recently received the most significant assignment since the last conflict. All of it was a bit much, but she would get by. She had to. A quick look around revealed facial expressions of equal shock everywhere. I see now that it wasn't just her. She took another look to see what kind of support she would receive for this, and the importance of her mission was emphasized by those involved more than anything else. The psychologist Sune and her stylist sister Tomako were present. Haruhi-sama was present as well. Despite not being seen in public for the past 40 years, she was still well known and the oldest member of the entire clan. Only a few old photos helped her recognize her. Haruhi-sama was a fantastic seductress and human interpreter. This includes persuading someone of her viewpoint and talking sense into their head. She was said to have started or stopped more than a dozen wars on her own. She certainly had the best chance of competing. Furthermore, she didn't have to wed a complete stranger only to assist him. Additionally, confirm that he would be suitable for Diamond, and her clan would help her with that as well if she did fall in love with him. Moriko nodded quickly and listened to Haruhi-sama as she began to organize the prince and herself's first meeting. Perhaps they would even develop romantic feelings for one another. In the Kin clan meeting room, Raiko-sama was Kuriko's destination. She knew the clan head would give her another mission because she had already completed a few. For the clan missions were the only times she was called into the meeting room. It was not a huge deal. She had completed every mission to date flawlessly as the clan head's granddaughter. Being flawless was just normal, so it wasn't like they were that hard. It wasn't shocking that she was the same because, to be honest, the majority of the Kin clan were flawless. There were 2 other girls present if she recalled correctly. It was Tama and Tomiko from the branch house, both well. She had to eventually get used to working with weaker girls at the very least. Those 2 belonged to the Kin clan, therefore, it shouldn't be a huge deal. Additionally, the mission was brief. She would get by. Good evening, Raiko-sama. Oh, you're here. Kuriko-chan, please take a seat. I have some very exciting news, though it's still confidential. The queen has found an heir, who turns out to be a boy, her great-grandson. To be exact, Prince Naruto Uzumaki now resides in the palace and receives private instruction. Only his guards, teachers, and relatives are permitted to be close to him. Even without the nature bloodline, which the prince actually possesses, Prince Naruto has apparently inherited some other bloodline and can become quite strong with a little training. He will be the ideal husband for you, Kuriko-chan, especially since the prince is still young enough to be properly taught. However, I was able to learn a little bit about him. His mother was from Uzu, and his father was the leader of a ninja village in Fire Country. He was born and raised in the West, most likely in the village where his father lived. So that the prince can choose who he wants to marry from all over the world. He will be in your year at school, beginning the next term, and you are to get close to him. Tama and Tomiko, you will do everything in your power to support Kuriko and ensure that no other girls approach the prince, but be careful if the queen or the prince's guards suspect foul play. They will keep Kuriko-chan away from him. I will tell you what I can about each of the fire people and their relationship to the prince, so only prank-like attacks, maybe a prank, accidentally, gone wrong at most, but mainly spreading rumors about the girls to make sure the prince is less interested in some of them and following Kuriko's instructions. You might want to work with people from Fire Country for a while, as they could be very helpful and have easier access to him. Since a king's wife is inherently the queen, our clan can gain the throne much more easily with that Naruto boy. However, if he is truly unconvinced to marry you, you can always put something in his food as long as you are close, right, Kuriko-chan? Anyway, there is still time before the announcement, not to mention before school starts. So I advise you to use the time to expand your wardrobe and perhaps even go to a beauty salon. Kuriko grinned. The mission might not be brief, but it would undoubtedly be fascinating. She was looking for a boy with power, position, and good genes. She was certain that she and the prince would make the ideal couple, especially since they were given a throne as a wedding present. After all, that had to be real love. In the Fushigi clan meeting room, Akira's fingers shook as she opened the door. It should come as no surprise that Hikari-sama mentioned her parents' deaths during her most recent visit. In fact, they had been the Fushigi clan's final on-duty ninjas. Their once proud clan was now down to 4 girls and a retired elder who served as the clan's head. A Crystal, who was originally from the Fushigi clan, was the subject of rumors. However, the royal family was the oath taken by all Crystals in order to formally leave their family. The majority adopted a new name even if she did exist. It was nearly impossible to get assistance from her. In addition, what assistance could she provide? Not that there were many left, but a quick look around revealed her entire clan present. However, it indicated that there were no fatalities to report. Furthermore, Hikari-sama was clearly in a positive frame of mind. It's a peculiar one. In fact, the clan head appeared to be both joyful and depressed at the same time, and did her eyes sparkle with that hope? Akira, much more at ease, sat down to listen to the elder after greeting everyone. Hello, Akira-chan, Hoshi-chan, Mika-chan, and Sakino-chan. I have some wonderful news. But you must swear not to discuss it with anyone else, not even among yourselves, okay? You are all aware that the Qin clan will probably take the throne after Queen Sari. However, you might be surprised to learn that the queen had a daughter named Carrie, who traveled a little before assuming the throne but vanished, leading everyone to believe she had passed away, leaving the queen too old to bear another child and without any other living relatives. Everyone assumed that the Qin, Mojimi, or our clan would be the next queen since they were the strongest clans at the time. However, our clan began to decline around that time, so it would take a miracle for our clan to inherit the throne. The Mojimi clan, on the other hand, didn't want the responsibility back then and probably doesn't want it now, so the Qin clan is the only possible successor after the queen. This was already known to Akira. She was also aware that her clan's skills were the best, and occasionally the only way to counter the Qin clan's skills are that some adults talked about how the Qin clan killed a lot of people in the Fushigi clan. The fact that the majority of her clan perished while a Qin clan member was present didn't help either, most of the time on a mission in a remote location. Naturally, she also understood that there was no genuine challenge to the throne from the Qin clan. The adults of her clan were the only ones who could have resisted them, but no one wanted them in charge. Unfortunately, she and Hikari-sama, let alone any of her cousins, were unable to engage in combat with a member of the Qin clan if that individual was even remotely average. Anyway, additionally, those without the jutsus of her clan had very little chance of defeating them. The prospect of the future was rather unsettling, particularly since even the remnants of her clan will most likely be destroyed by the Qin clan. That problem had nothing good about it. Despite bringing up the subject, Hikari-sama was actually in a great mood and did share some good news. An alliance with the Qin clan was out of the question. Akira was certain. Simply put, they had caused too much harm to be pardoned. In addition, no sane person thought that clan was reliable. Perhaps the Mojimi clan is at last prepared to take the throne? It was obvious to the children. Hikari added, the queen has a new heir as a result of Carrie's child finding its way to the palace. What's even more intriguing is that the heir is a boy named Naruto Uzumaki, who, as far as I can tell, still has the nature bloodline. Prince Naruto will be revealed in a few days, but in the meantime, I'll try to learn as much as I can about him. As of right now, I know that the prince and girls from all over the world will attend Akira-chan's year at the academy. You should try to be one of the prince's wives. Akira-chan, I know I'm essentially asking you to forego your happiness, but you and your cousins will probably perish in one of your first missions if the royal family doesn't defend our clan. I apologize. She stopped. She made no movement at all. Even if she had wanted to move, she might not have been able to. Akira had only desired a small family of her own, a few kids to raise and expand the clan. To love and be loved by a husband, it never appeared irrational or even out of the ordinary. However, now it was simply unfair. Unlike some other girls, she never even deceived herself. Akira was aware that there would be sporadic arguments and that she would have to share her husband, some with her marriage sisters, and some with her husband. However, now it was impossible to achieve even such a basic dream. When Akira noticed the first damp patch, she became alarmed. She was reminded by a strangely serene part of her mind that the roof had only been rebuilt 2 months prior. Rain couldn't be the cause. She thus made a formal and profound bow to the head of her clan. I'm glad. Her eyes were covered before realizing that she could move again. She bowed later. She would be concerned about breathing once more perhaps. Akira had enough to worry about for now. Hikari-sama promised to assist as much as she could and explained that she would provide them with all the information she could find. Mika-chan, Sakino-chan, and Hoshi-chan were quick to make the same pledge. Everyone had a hoarse voice, as though they had spent the last 2 days yelling at one another. Hell, a screaming match would have been more her style. The younger children were swiftly escorted out of the room by Hikari-sama, who instructed them to spend some time coming up with some ideas to assist Akira in her mission. She simply told the oldest to take as much time as she required. Oh no, time was not what Akira wanted, or assistance, for that matter. Instead of pursuing a guy she didn't like in the first place, she wanted to maintain her dream. However, if she failed the mission, one of her cousins would have to end up with the prince, or her clan would perish entirely. There was just no avoiding it. They required royal defense and Prince Naruto was the only source of it. Akira wouldn't be old enough to start a family without him. Anyway, is it a good thing that her dream would never have come true? Hopefully, she would win the prince's heart. Perhaps she would also grow to like him, but at this point, true love seemed all but impossible to her. Scenes like this occurred throughout Titan, and those scenes would soon occur everywhere. At the very least, the upcoming school year was going to be entertaining. Hiyoshi's week wasn't good. This was becoming absurd. Even though he couldn't recall a pleasant week since his excitement over Hanabi's birth subsided for ages, the Hyuga clan's political power had been gradually declining, but at least their fighting style and tracking skills had continued to inspire fear or admiration. The combination of the Byakugan and the soft fist had always been enough to earn others a good deal of respect. That is, until his eldest child went to the academy and looked down on the soft fist. The first Hyuga to ever finish in the bottom half of their class ranking was Hinata. Everyone in the clan had placed in the top 10. But not all of them were able to be the best of their years. Even in those situations, the top spot was usually unachievable due to an outstanding ninja in their year, such as Kakashi Hitaki or Minato Namikaze. However, Hinata, under pressure, she had never performed well, but if people were lenient with her, it wouldn't do her much good. The issues and risks could quickly escalate at any mission Hinata undertakes. It was better that she learned to fight from the safety of the village. She simply didn't, and that was the issue. Pressure was something Hinata never adapted to, not at all. It wasn't a lack of skills. Either Hiyoshi might have agreed to that. Additionally, it would be simpler to manage. You practice until you get better at something you're not good at. Simple and easy. Okay, it might take a lot of time, but it is definitely possible, particularly when a whole clan is supporting her. However, what should you do if someone is capable of fighting but chooses not to? He was also aware of Hinata's extraordinary fighting skills. Hiyoshi witnessed what was likely her first, and only until Uzumaki left, actual altercation. She had visited the Uzumaki boy's house on Valentine's Day of last year and left chocolate for him in front of his door. The Uchiha then emerged from the street. What the boy wanted from the Jinchuriki had been a mystery to Hiyoshi. He could still recall his own astonishment when his daughter, on a sugar high the size of a mountain, unexpectedly outran Maeda and fled into hiding straight up the wall utilizing the tree walking chakra technique and remained there. She had fallen off after the third step the day before. In retrospect, Hiyoshi saw that Hinata's tree walking was the first indication that she was stronger and more capable than anyone had thought. She included. 5 minutes later, the Uchiha boy took Uzumaki's chocolate and tossed it in the trash, which was his next surprise. Too quietly for Hiyoshi to hear, he muttered something to himself. He didn't have to, though like any Hyuga, Hiyoshi had the ability to read lips. There, the Dobi should be silent for a while, when he doesn't get anything for Valentine's. Hopefully, without him interrupting the classes, I can finally learn something useful. A Jinchuriki was a military advantage, so Hiyoshi couldn't help but frown. And it was crucial that they remained loyal. He could see why people would avoid the Uzumaki boy and make sure the kids didn't go near him because they were afraid of him, but torturing him for such a selfish, immature purpose. That was extremely risky, needless, and extremely foolish. The child was unaware of this, to be sure, but still that wasn't really a justification for such a petty and useless act. Not against an orphan. Hiyoshi was abruptly reminded that there were others in the room who could read lips. Hinata appeared enraged. It was the first time he had ever seen her even slightly irritated. In fact, he had been persuaded that timid, young Hinata was incapable of experiencing any anger at all. However, at this moment his sweet little girl appeared more like a cross between a famished dragon and a raging tiger. The top student of her year was beaten within an inch of his life by his timid daughter, who had not won a single spar at home or at school and was only able to avoid being last in class due to paper tests. Over the course of the next 10 minutes, if he had ever seen an eye-opener, that was it. Hinata tried to hide her tears as she fled after exacting her revenge on the self-proclaimed avenger. Hiyoshi thought about threatening the Uchiha boy as the boy pulled himself away in order to get him to refrain from suing Hinata, but changed their mind in any case. No one would believe him not to disparage timid little Hinata. However, the Uchiha never pursued revenge, probably because he didn't want his loss to be known. Without a doubt, the boy never recognized Hinata's influence at school. It was somewhat prophetic about what lay ahead. It's interesting that the Uchiha boy was the most well-liked, but all he displayed was a lack of talent, discernment, and moral fiber. The lucky one will be in for a big surprise because half the village's girls were chasing him. The best his future wife could hope for, based on his actions that day, was to be disregarded. It was obvious that the child was incapable of displaying affection or compassion or experience both. Nevertheless, Hiyashi found hope for his daughter and the Hyuga clan as a whole in this brief episode. Perhaps she wasn't as troublesome as he had assumed. It's clear that she could fight very well if she had the proper motivation. Additionally, she had always performed admirably in other areas. If Hinata hadn't been so skilled at strategy and money, she most likely would have already been placed in the branch family. Hiyashi, lost in contemplation, purchased fresh chocolate and placed it at Uzumaki's door. Hinata had been spot on in her assessment of the Uchiha. Perhaps the girl was correct about the Jinchuriki as well. The clan had frequently discussed her obsession with Naruto Uzumaki, which was interpreted as more evidence of her deficiency in Hyuga skills. Every Hyuga in history had, after all, fallen for powerful and influential individuals. Even though they weren't particularly noteworthy as kids, they had all grown up to become well-known and trustworthy adults. It was claimed that all Hyugas were able to see the personality and potential more easily, sooner, and clearly than anyone else due to the Byakugan. Because of this talent, Hyuga children frequently just saw early on what kind of spouse a person would make and fell in love accordingly. Granted, this was frequently more of a hassle and heartache than a help. After all, just because you saw something before others did not mean you got it. Innumerable Hyugas had suffered heartbreak. In any case, everyone expected her to fall for the last Uchiha because of this talent and the Uchiha's reputation, and was prepared to comfort her when the unavoidable occurred. Hinata, however, never gave the boy any thought for this. The entire clan thought she was blind. She continued to disregard his existence even after every other girl began pursuing him. Rather, the Jinchuriki captured her heart since the boy was the last of the academy, a miscreant, a brash idiot, uncivilized, and unsuccessful at almost everything. No one anticipated that he would amount to anything. However, his own daughter recognized something in him that no one else did. Hiyashi was absolutely certain that it was genuine love and not merely a passing fancy. There was never a simple crush on Hyugas. Never. As was customary at the time, the clan chose to stay out of the way until the girl requested assistance. However, interfere usually means to help a Hyuga get someone's attention. It had been agreed to try to reason with Hinata if she asked for assistance regarding a potential relationship with Uzumaki. She simply couldn't marry someone who couldn't speak for a single minute without shouting at the top of his lungs or insulting someone. However, Hinata had always been correct about the Uchiha. He was unreliable and unsuited for a relationship of any kind. Perhaps, just possibly, she was correct about the Uzumaki as well. A Jinchuriki, after all, possessed a tremendous power that, if mastered, would make him one of the most formidable fighters imaginable. Hiyashi, however, could and would wait. Hinata didn't really have any rivals, and he could help the girl if she was right. In this manner, the clan would benefit greatly and his daughter could marry whoever she desired. The plan had been ideal. However, now the boy from Uzumaki was gone, probably dead. Even without other villages learning that Konoha had lost its Jinchuriki, he left the village in a mess, not to mention his own clan, and no one was able to locate him. Their famous Byakugan was made fun of by that boy. Fortunately, they weren't the only ones who couldn't locate him. There was a commotion throughout the village. Some were terrified or called for Uzumaki's execution. There were the parties after that. The kids had already begun to pose awkward queries. The secret surrounding Uzumaki would be revealed if things continued in this manner. Additionally, if the kids behaved strangely, the Jinchuriki's loyalty would probably be broken when he returned, if it hadn't already happened. Even worse than the village itself was Hiyashi's family, since shouting at the Hokage of all people, Hinata had remained silent. Furthermore, Hanabi could no longer remain in the same room for longer than 3 seconds because she was too terrified of her own sister. That was the attitude of the rest of the main family. Hinata made sure that everyone knew that she didn't care. Mealtimes were at least quite entertaining. Nor had she spoken at missions. Fortunately, her team was still competing in D ranks and would not soon face any threats. Before any issues were resolved and her team collaborated effectively, Kurenai wouldn't allow her students to receive even a single C rank, not to mention permitting them to depart the village before they had even established a conversation. Hinata hasn't accepted or offered assistance during missions as of yet. Not at all. She followed Kurenai's instructions, disregarded both teammates, and remained silent the entire time. The only glimmer of hope he had was that Hinata had recently improved because she had taken him seriously in their spars. However, the attempt on your life by your own daughter was a little concerning. With the compassion of a starved wolf and the zeal of an Inuzuka with a blood feud, the darkest silver lining he had ever witnessed was undoubtedly Hinata's fighting prowess, particularly since her loyalty was at best dubious. However he phrased it, it was simply wrong to be pleased when your own child tries to kill you. However, not everyone was as concerned as he was. For instance, the entire situation was hilarious to the branch family. Neji is the only one who does. Hiyashi had always wished for a reconciliation between Hinata and his nephew, and now his wish has come true. They couldn't be separated and pulled practical jokes that would have made Uzumaki green with jealousy, including himself, the Hokage, the Anbus, and the elders. His hair had already been dyed pink, blue, green, and orange in contrast. His robes had been blood red and yellow. strewn with feathers, flowers, glass fragments, and mud. Fortunately, the other disruption could be concealed, and how they did it was still a mystery to him. Or even how, given Hinata's silence, they were able to plan these practical jokes. Not even to Neji. The details of the tricks Hinata had played on other people were unknown to him. However, he was quite uneasy that the Anbus were genuinely afraid to even approach the compound. Nobody has been able to prove anything to her, which is the only reason she hasn't been punished yet. Even the Hokage didn't. Hiyashi was at the end of his rope. He was genuinely clueless about how to handle his daughters. I hoped Uzumaki was still alive and would return to the village soon. He would even assist Hinata with the boy, provided she regained her composure at that point. Perhaps Hanabi would also quit evading and avoiding her own sister. If not, he would be extremely concerned about the loyalty of both girls. What a mess. It was always such a pain to be in true love. The queen took Naruto to her private study. She wanted to discuss something significant with him privately. Not that talk. Please, Sure will be in charge of that. He will share all of his knowledge with Naruto and suspects, and had completed it. Perhaps it wasn't such a good idea to let her pervert husband give Naruto the talk. Her adorable grandson entered the room before she could think about this any further. Following a brief hand signal, she and his guards went outside once more to hold off until their conversation was over. She was safe, but not before Naruto made sure they knew it. He would protect Gran. Because of this, it's best to get going even without delays. This would take too long. Say, Naruto, what do you think your life will be like as the King of Diamond? Huh? I didn't really think about it. To be honest, I guess it will be similar to being Hokage, right? Only with a big country instead of a hidden village. And what do you think the life of the Hokage is like? That's easy. The Hokage told me a few things about this. Let's see. You get the fancy hat, the biggest office in the city, and all others obey you. You also are the strongest in the village, and everyone likes and acknowledges you, because you protect them. What else? Oh, right, as Hokage you have a lot of money and most girls would like to date you. This response caused the queen to frown. There was a serious problem, even though she was unable to identify it. Why in the world had the Hokage told Naruto such a lie? In any case, why had they discussed this? Or even conversed with one another? First things first. Correct Naruto and bury those silly, childish, and fantastical ideas so deep that not even an army of miners could find them. Really? So that is what he said, and what exactly did you see? Did you see how much others liked the Hokage? Did you see that absolute everybody obeyed the Hokage? Did you yourself obey him? Have you seen him in any relationship or know how much money he has? Naruto took notice of that. He had always trusted and believed the Hokage. However, he had also been aware of the fox and had acted as though he was unaware of it. In addition, Naruto thought Sakura liked him because of his advice. It's time to examine what the elderly man had told him in more detail. First, about other people's admiration for the Hokage. Alright, that was simple. His own grandson didn't think highly of him. According to rumors, his own son went to the daimyo merely to avoid his father. Not everyone who wasn't related to the Sandaime was always pleased with him either. Only the mummy man, Danzo, correct, had frequently grumbled and quarreled with the Hokage. That also clarifies whether or not everyone actually followed his instructions. No, they argued and complained until the Hokage bowed. Oh no, Naruto only complied in the slightest because he wished to succeed him. Even so, Naruto had largely disregarded the elderly man's advice. In retrospect, he had largely disregarded the Sandaime before learning of the benefits of that role straight from the Hokage himself. Great, what a complete fool he had been. All the Hokage had to do was say something lovely, and he believed it, and based on those damn lies, he even chose his own life goals, and began to follow the Hokage's instructions, listening to them all. At least he was now far away from that old bastard who was lying. Naruto considered the final points. Just to be thorough, the Hokage had been married for a while, but the Kyuubi attack claimed his wife. However, that was years ago. Furthermore, the elderly man never had another woman in his life. As far as Naruto is aware, it was probably not for lack of trying, though, given what a pervert he was. Despite their respect for the Hokage, the village's women showed little interest in him, not even his age group. And for large offices and money, Naruto was certain that the Hyuga clan had a larger office and a lot more money. Too, Naruto gained a lot of information by sneaking into their compound. As a result of some pranks, Naruto had visited other clans besides the Hyugas. No, the only true thing he mentioned seems to be the hat, maybe the part about the strength. Too, he lied to me on purpose, didn't he? Was Naruto's final admission, delivered in a rather small voice. I'm sorry, Naruto, I don't know him well, and I'm not sure why he told you this, but I do know that a lot of this is just untrue. Your initial assumption that the roles of king and Hokage are similar is correct. There are some differences, but let's start with the similarities. Both have a number of important responsibilities, the most important of which is to their people. Without people, a country or village is empty. a ghost city, and essentially dead. A king without subjects is just a landowner with no authority or company, and most likely he owns dead, empty land. A cage without a village or with a ghost village is just a powerful shinobi. Not exactly harmless, but not particularly dangerous either, because a single person can't always be careful and can be assassinated if he causes trouble. However, with an entire village on guard, it is nearly impossible to kill a cage in secret. It would require a huge battle, and the trouble is rarely worth it. The Hokage needs his ninjas to carry out missions, and the civilians for trade and regular service. Your education will cover a lot of strategy, politics, plans, counters, contingency plans, security, and other topics to help you with this duty in the future. The duty to the future is linked to the duty to the people and entails making sure your land can prosper, taking advantage of opportunities, and generally making life safer and better for the people. It also entails avoiding mistakes or problems like diplomatic incidents that could lead to war and consequently to destruction. Last but not least is the duty to the land. To increase the territory while ensuring that no part of it is lost, but only if your subjects will not suffer as a result. A war over territory is only justified if there is insufficient space for your subjects to survive. If preventing a war would result in more deaths than participating in one, I would not think twice about declaring one. But that is almost never the case. Most nobles start wars for pride-related or other foolish reasons. I can handle those responsibilities for the time being, but I won't be around forever, so eventually they will fall on you. Don't worry, you'll be ready for every one of them, and I and your great-grandfather will give you time and advice to help you get used to it. We had an heir, your grandmother, my daughter Carrie, but we lost her. She was prepared to take the throne, but she wanted to travel beforehand and for some reason never returned. Then there is the duty to ensure a successor, which is actually part of ensuring the future. The only difference is that a king produces an heir to continue the line, while a Hokage looks for a successor in the ranks to appoint a suitably strong ninja. Regardless, this responsibility is yours since you are our only surviving relative and I am well past childbearing age. You will eventually need to start a family and raise your child to be a decent king or queen. Ideally, you will have more children so that our line is no longer in danger of going extinct. You must understand our bloodline and the bloodlines of the other members of your family in order to realize that you are in a unique position. Let's begin with the nature bloodline, which is not exclusive to our family. In fact, the majority of Diamond's population possesses it as well. The greatest benefit of the nature bloodline is the capacity to absorb chakra from our environment, which allows us to replenish chakra reserves or boost our stamina at will. A small amount of chakra will always be absorbed, even when we are unconscious, and it requires some training to stop absorbing chakra or to absorb more at will. You will receive the required instruction beginning next Monday. The unfortunate drawback of our bloodline is that it only produces female descendants. And tell your mother, no woman with nature bloodline had ever given birth to a boy. You certainly do have that bloodline, or else you would not have been able to open the basement, and the seal at all entrances would have put you to sleep. Instead, the basement serves as an escape passageway, and the seal is there to ensure that no one can use it for infiltration. As a precaution, if the castle were attacked and we had to evacuate, I would open it and evacuate everyone. In any case, our country has a lot more women than men because women with the nature bloodline only conceive girls. As a result, we have a few different laws and customs regarding relationships and marriage than most other countries. For instance, it is normal for a man to marry a lot of women, usually 3 or 4, but because of your status, you will be expected to marry at least 6. What? But you can't just tell me to go and marry 6 girls. And I'm not. You're only 12, and no one expects you to marry before you're 18. In addition, it would be 7. I'm just telling you this because I believe you have a right to know and to help you understand why people will act in certain ways. I don't expect you to get a girlfriend or several shortly after that, let alone get married by tomorrow, but I also won't stop you if you choose to do so. Because I'm certain that's what will happen. I'm trying to explain to you why so many girls will want to be your girlfriend. I just want you ready for this, okay? Okay, I guess, but only if you promise not to force me to get a girlfriend or marry someone. Okay, Gran. With a dejected sigh, the queen said, "That's fine, I promise, and I will make sure Surei doesn't force you on a girl either or knowing him into a girl." She had no intention of persuading her beloved husband to keep this pledge. He truly wanted Naruto to start having children, but he could be so obstinate at times. Better than yesterday men. Anyway, since there aren't many boys born in Diamond, women travel for a while after they grow up, and some of them return with a potential husband. The majority of men who live in Diamond, and particularly Titan, are actually from somewhere else. Your great-grandfather Surei was one of them. He grew up in an elemental country, just like you. I think it was Earth country. Although a woman's family must approve her marriage before she can marry, it's actually more that they can marry but remain childless without their family's approval. All girls are given a seal soon after birth that prevents them from getting pregnant, and they are only removed if their family approves of the husband they choose. This seal protects the children because there have been a few attempted kidnappings the elemental countries and a few others wanted our bloodline. So since every girl has one, they're safe and useless as breeding stock. The only exception is our family. None of the royal family has ever had this type of seal, but we are always protected by bodyguards. You have an appointment with our family doctor tomorrow after lessons because of the nature bloodline. Since no male has ever inherited this bloodline before, I'm not sure if you would be able to have boys, girls, both, or neither. You can't just check my manliness, squeaked a jaundiced Naruto. The queen logically pointed out, of course I can't. I don't know that much about medicine, that's why I asked the doctor to take a look at you. But Naruto refused to allow anyone to question his masculinity. Damn it. Gran. I won't show my Johnson to a complete stranger, and that's final. Come on. Naruto, the doctor will check you completely to make sure you're as healthy as you look. She will take a sample of your blood as well for a few tests. One of those tests will tell us what gender your future children can have. She won't need to look at your privates. The main reason for this checkup is actually if the strain of your lessons is too much, that's all. Naruto looked up. Wait a minute, does that mean I don't have to go to school, if the doctor says so? Not exactly. It means we can ease the workload, especially in your current private lessons. The doctor will tell us if you work too much and how many lessons were better for your health. Oh, okay then, all right, the queen blinked, but remember, I don't know every single detail of any bloodline except those native to Diamond. The nature bloodline is just one bloodline. You have a few more. Let's talk about your Uzumaki heritage next. I can't really teach you those things, but I sent a letter to Uzu's daimyo, your grandfather, earlier, and I'm fairly certain you will get training from him or someone he chose. The Uzumakis, the royal family of Uzu, are known for their seals and swordsmanship, as well as their chakra chains. They can make those chains and shoot one end at the enemy, and I believe the other end stays in their body depending on the Uzumaki's chakra reserve. They can bind or drag people and objects, sometimes even bijus, with them. Unfortunately, that's about all I know about them. The only other thing I know is that the Uzu royal family is quite small, to the point where I can't even tell how small their bloodline is, on the verge of going extinct. Then we have the Kyushu clan's bloodline, which means that they can heal any wound as long as it isn't fatal, even without medical assistance. Some people claim that they never get scars from their healing, but others have said that they have seen scars on a Kyushu, so I'm not sure. Your father, Minato Namikaze, must have also had this bloodline, but he was so quick that, as far as I know, he was rarely hurt, so it probably just went unnoticed. Everyone assumed that bloodline would disappear with Jiraiya. If I hadn't witnessed the evidence with my own eyes, I would never have believed that immature mockery of a man ever managed to get a woman, let alone have a child. In fact, the healing is a physical bloodline, meaning it directly impacts your body. It is also entirely passive. You cannot activate it, train it, or even suppress it. If you are hurt, you heal. I don't know why no one in the Senju clan has learned to use that bloodline since that Hashirama, but it's actually rather odd now that I think about it. The last bloodline is from your grandmother on your father's side, Tsunade Senju, but as far as I know, she is unable to use it. I'm afraid you will have to get that on your own. The bloodline is called Wood Release, and it's more or less a normal elemental bloodline. Those are usually pretty straightforward, meaning you combine two elements to get something else. This means that, like all other elemental bloodlines, you must master the base elements, in this case water and earth, and then begin working on the right combination. After mastering the nature bloodline, you will receive some training in your base elements. The combining varies slightly between two people, even if they belong to the same clan. The only thing we can't give you that you might have gotten from the Senju clan are some of the jutsus that are already out there. You'll have to make your own using Wood Release, but I've heard it's not that difficult once you've mastered the combining, so I can give you some ideas for those too. In addition, it's unlikely that the Senjus actually had any of those jutsus, or if they did, that some of them were still in existence. The Senju bloodline is thought to have already died out because Tsunade Senju, the last known Senju, is past childbearing age, never learned the Wood Release, and has no known children. Odd that no one knew the Namikaze was her child. Bloodlines are divided into different types, such as physical, elemental, and eye bloodlines, and there are a few that don't fit into any of those categories. These few are frequently extremely rare. The nature bloodline and the chakra chains of the Uzumaki are two examples of this unique type of bloodline, and I believe there are perhaps 10 more special ones out there. Generally speaking, people don't get more than 3 bloodlines. The idea is that the 3 usual bloodline types kind of interfere with each other. For instance, if you have a child with someone who has a physical bloodline, the child will not inherit either your healing or the mother's, unless the mother also has the same healing. This also applies to elemental bloodlines. If the mother had a bloodline for ice and the father had one for mist, the child will not receive either. Eye bloodlines also operate in this manner. It is possible for 2 different, special bloodlines to simply add to each other, I am positive that you have both because the Uzumaki bloodline did not cancel your nature bloodline. But there is no guarantee. Two special bloodlines can just as easily interfere with each other and leave the child without either. Only special bloodlines are different, and I am positive that none of them interfere with any of the normal bloodlines. So much for your bloodlines. Anyway, you are the only heir of Diamond and in line for Uzu's succession. And you have all 4 bloodlines, 3 of which are on the verge of extinction and the other of which is highly sought after by most nations. As a result, many nations and families will want to have a daughter near you, either for the throne or your bloodlines, or perhaps both. There will be a huge festival for your introduction to Diamond as a whole, and the daimyo of Uzu will probably organize something similar in his country. For the same reason, the other countries will also receive official notes about your heritage, both the political and the bloodlines. Unfortunately, I had to tell the council about you and your heritage, so probably a few girls in Titan already know about you. To prepare you for the likely reactions and to go over some specifics, I actually called you here to explain everything that will be mentioned in those notes. The notes will essentially cover your bloodlines, what they do, and the fact that you are just beginning to receive proper training with them. They will also tell you your exact station in relation to the line of succession for both Diamond and Uzu. In order to gain your bloodlines for their countries, every other country, or nearly all of them, will send a large group of girls to Titan for diplomatic relationships. In reality, these girls would likely be ordered to seduce you and try to become your wife or at least get pregnant from you. I wouldn't be too concerned about it, as you will need to start a family eventually, but the issue would be the number of people arriving in Titan. We would find it difficult to maintain order with half the population from another country, some of whom are even at war with one another. Well, you see the problem. If we don't establish some basic guidelines, we'll be overrun and have foreigners fight on our soil. For this reason, the official notes will also include an invitation. Each country is permitted to send 3 girls to Titan with a maximum of 10 escorts. These girls will be considered your fiancés, and they and Diamond's children will begin the next school term with you. You will be introduced to the girls before school begins so you can see who will try to win your heart. We can control the numbers a little bit because the other countries will prefer to send their girls to the same school as you rather than sending them on a diplomatic mission and running the risk that they won't even see you. However, you have the final say and can veto any decision pertaining to your girls, including mine. This means you can add a girl you like to your fiancés, provided the girl agrees, or break off a betrothal and send the girl home. Over time, I will also send a few girls home if I don't think they'd be good for you or Diamond, but I won't reject any girl you like. The daimyo of Uzu and his family can also have a say in those decisions if they want to. You'll also have an easier time when there are fewer girls to maintain peace and order. There will be strict rules. For instance, if someone tries to attack someone outside of spars or sabotage another girl, all 3 of their country will be expelled from Diamond, and we will stop doing business with them. We can give some girls a personal maid, but we shouldn't give them to every girl. Perhaps your favorites or something, and the girls can't just come visit you without an appointment, so you'll never be at peace. Of course, you can visit each of them whenever you want, and you'll meet all of your fiancés at the welcome festival at the latest. I won't get involved in intern problems as long as they keep them to themselves. Additionally, even though Sure and I won't sway your decision, we are always happy to offer guidance and a little assistance, whether it be regarding girls, life in general, or a particular issue. Well, Naruto, would you like to alter any of those regulations or arrangements? Naruto complained to himself. I want to skip the whole thing. School too, if we're already at it. Gran's lips quirked, so I assumed she must have heard him. It couldn't really help, though Titan would be overrun if they forbade these betrothals because everyone would send as many girls as they could to him. Okay Gran, if I have to. Anything else you're going to dump on me? He conceded, letting out a final resigned sigh. The queen smiled at the terrified boy and said, now if you want more I can always give you a few ideas what sort of girl to look for. No, it's okay, really. Well, I guess I'll just have to satisfy your curiosity once. Where do I start? Oh, yes, that would do. Everyone has different priorities and goals, and at some point, everyone is different from everyone else, but it's easier to figure out what matters most to a person. For some, that's money, fame, power, and strength. For others, it's other people, like family or friends, and occasionally even people in general. Naturally, I want you to be happy, but I also want our nation to be safe and our citizens to be satisfied, so you must consider your future responsibilities as well as those of the girls when you make your decision. Many girls will want to be your wife and the future queen of Diamond, and at least some of them will probably try to get together with you for the money, while others may want the power of our army. If you make a bad decision, the entire nation will suffer. Consider your future lives, what responsibilities you and your wives will have, and how a typical day will unfold. A girl who neglects basic tasks, such as schoolwork, will probably neglect her work as queen as well, or perform it poorly. Your classes will cover politics and strategy, So pay close attention to how your girls perform in those subjects. You should also pay close attention to how they treat others, not just yourself, because they are more likely to be honest with strangers than with you because they don't care what the stranger thinks. Consider carrying on our tradition. It is preferable to pick girls who have some experience and knowledge of raising children, or at least who exhibit promise in that area. Of course, a nanny can raise your children in the worst situation, but it is preferable to raise them yourself as parents. There is also the domestic bliss to take into account. Since you must marry at least 7 girls, it is essential that they all get along with you. In the best case scenario, they will be or become friends. It is sufficient if they can just coexist peacefully. Having said that, there are clearly some types of girls that you should avoid marrying for both your own happiness and Diamond's future. Basically, any girl who would struggle with such a life or her responsibilities, regardless of the cause. Some girls are extremely shallow. They will approach as many people as possible who have money and power. The more, the better. They frequently expect their husband to take care of them and all of their problems. You can usually identify them as the girls who ignore any real work and instead loudly declare their unwavering love for their targets. They only do what they want or are compelled to do. They will ignore anything that they won't be tested on, no matter the consequences. Suddenly, Sakura appeared in Naruto's mind, gratifying the final Uchiha with a smile. Since he was the most attractive and powerful person at school, probably the most preparation she had ever done was reading for the next test. Naruto had frequently asked her to train with him because she was not very good at taijutsu. However, she had consistently ignored him, claiming she had more crucial tasks to complete, even as an excuse. That was absurd because ninja training was essential to survival. The more important things were frequently simple shopping. The queen went on, oblivious to Naruto's frown. Arrogance is another reason to exercise caution. Even if a girl is significantly superior to her peers, she should maintain her modesty. If she thinks she is better or more important than anyone else, she will unconsciously look down on others, which will only lead to animosity. This is something you shouldn't have to deal with other governments, your own family, or the people of Diamond. Then there are girls who are just lazy. They would let their work rot until it was too late and everyone was in trouble, which is fortunate because you would not be interested in them anyway. I don't think I need to discuss abusive girls because no sane person would send someone here who would attempt to hit you, but just so you know, there are some girls out there who have such a violent temper that they would hit someone for something as trivial as a miscommunication or a bad day, even if the boy in question waited on her hand and foot. Usually, these girls also have a conscience like a kunai, which means that while the end pointed at others is sharp, accurate, and dangerous, their own end is blunt and has a large enough hole to get through. At Grand's description, Naruto could only nod. Recalling Sakura, he still thought she was beautiful, at least in appearance, but oddly, thinking about her no longer hurt as much. Perhaps getting Sakura to like him wasn't as important now that he had a family and many people who cared about him. Unaware that her great-grandson nodded out of experience, she pointed to other possible issues instead of merely demonstrating that he understood her. However, selfish girls are the second most dangerous type, especially when they hold positions of power, such as queenship. Selfish people only know what is right for themselves, and they typically struggle with compassion and sharing, which are bad qualities for any kind of relationship, much less a marriage with more than 2 people. They would likely only pass laws to further their status and neglect their jobs otherwise. You should actively search for clues because it should not be too difficult to conceal a lack of attention for others. Selfish girls will definitely try to get you, and most of them will probably know not to be obvious. They will try to look like little angels for you, as well as for Sure and me, by flirting or acting selfishly. Those who enjoy causing pain and suffering are the last and by far the most dangerous group of people to become future leaders. They are likely to start a war or inflict suffering on their own people, although I doubt anyone would allow a cruel girl near them. You should still exercise caution because they are likely to turn their backs on their former masters. When cruel girls interact with someone they consider unimportant or useless, they almost always reveal their true nature. For instance, if a maid works for them or a child, say 3 years old, gets lost and someone finds him, they may try to find the child's parents. Cruel girls may also try to find the child's parents, but only if they gain something from it. Otherwise, they will likely taunt the poor thing. Since none of those traits are easy to conceal and they typically coexist in varying degrees, you should be fine as long as you pay attention. Even though they may not be as significant to you personally, these are the qualities your wives should possess. First and foremost, kindness and compassion are crucial for raising children, ruling a nation, or assisting in its governance, and fostering marriages. They are the antithesis of cruelty, but they are comparable. Just observe how the girls act when they feel unmonitored and engage with a vulnerable person. A future queen should also take her responsibilities and people seriously. She should be polite, or Diamond will eventually be at war. All of your girls should be aware of politics and, if at all possible, people. They must also be able to cooperate. You can assess most of this in your classes. It would be much easier for everyone if you chose a group of girls who are friends and pursued you together in the best case scenario. A girl who can finish a project with someone can also share her husband with that person. The amount of effort a girl puts into class shows how important she considers her duty, and how she works with others in class and treats them at break shows she can cooperate and how important she considers others. Anyway, back to the subject. You will almost always observe your classmates' manners, particularly during lunch. One of your classes is politics, and if you would like to gauge a girl from another class, you can always ask the teacher. Oh, understanding people. To begin with, understanding and liking are entirely different. You can fall in love with a girl even if you are completely baffled by her, and you can hate someone even if you understand him well enough to predict every move he makes. However, you will generally like someone more if you understand him or her. Understanding people is actually quite complicated. At first glance, it can be necessary to judge someone's character, but it can also be dangerous if you start to stick to your initial assumption instead of paying attention. The more accurate your assessment, the easier it will be to negotiate. A good understanding also makes it easier to cheer someone up or even predict their actions, including whether or not they are trustworthy. There are many other advantages, but it can be challenging to determine how good someone is at understanding others. I don't really know, but it's not really the most important part, so just keep it in the back of your mind. Okay. Maybe people who are more frequently surprised by others have more trouble with this. If your favorite isn't good at parenting, it's even harder to predict. In that case, you have to actively search for someone who is. If the worst happens, your servants can always take care of your kids, but it would be better for them if they were raised by their real parents. Although loyalty to you, our family, and Diamond is the most important quality in a future wife, keep in mind that some girls will come from other countries, and if they are more loyal to their former countries than to Diamond, they may betray you or give away confidential information. Sure, and I will also be on the lookout for any potential issues, so please talk to us if you find a girl intriguing in that way. For starters, it should be sufficient to consider what a girl would be like in her daily life as a wife, mother, and queen. Try to picture your life together, and if you want such a life, follow your heart. Naruto didn't want it and hadn't planned it. Still, his mind was filled with pictures. What ifs? Had he actually succeeded in becoming Hokage and wed Sakura? On the surface, it looks pretty because of his title. He would have thought that everyone would like him, thinking that everyone followed his instructions, thinking that since their first year at the academy, Sakura had adored him. Sakura shouting at him while his Jonin's look on Sakura requests that he alter the academy's standards. Thus, the only thing that mattered was knowledge. As a smart Sakura-chan requested, he cancelled all in-person classes, including taijutsu, shuriken training, and ninjutsu. Sakura begged him to make trade better so she could purchase that lovely new gown. He was reducing security so that businesses could have easier access to Konoha. Sakura was spending more money than they had on jewelry and clothing. The third told him that a Hokage has always a lot of money, so he didn't pay attention. Sakura, expecting respect from both visitors and Konoha ninjas simply because she was the Hokage's wife. Sakura was frequently kidnapped because she was too helpless to protect herself. He was attempting to win her back. It's not the first time. Giving his ninjas orders to assist the person who had been shouting at them whenever she was having a rough day, because almost no one had not heard Sakura yell at them because everyone likes the Hokage. He ignored unhappy people and failed to comprehend the situation. People are starting to despise him and Sakura for him, for his ignorance, and for Sakura, for her conceit. Since everyone obeys the Hokage, he never questions or verifies anyone. The pictures just kept coming. There was nothing Naruto could do. All he did was stand and gaze and considered the catastrophes that would have occurred if his wishes had come true. His dream, which he had had since he could remember, suddenly became a horrific nightmare. It's funny, after Konoha repeatedly rejected his dream as impractical, he also constantly heard arguments against his attempting to become Hokage, if not outright rejection. He had never bothered to keep track of either incident, not to mention hearing them. He would have lost count long ago. Even if he had tried, still, he held on to his dreams now. For the first time, he is genuinely regarded as capable of leading a village, even a nation. The first time someone listens, supports, and offers guidance, and his ambition to become Hokage is dashed by that very conversation. And his desire to date Sakura? She must have rejected Naruto as much as he had rejected his idea of becoming Hokage. That didn't stop him, though the goal of this conversation was to find the prince a partner as quickly as possible. Rather, the advice made him lose whatever remaining interest he might have had in Sakura. Naruto was torn between crying and laughing. He let go of his longtime crush and settled for a little sigh. Perhaps their never being together was for the best, that they would never again see one another. It's time to look forward. It was a lot to process, though hell, that was probably more than all of his private teachers combined taught him in a week. Naruto returned to his chamber, his mind still whirling with all the details, duties, expectations, and advice. He just lay there thinking about the future, his future fiancé copyright S, and the school he would soon be attending. Naruto had just completed recording Grand's counsel. He would have hated it because he didn't even mind doing what he had previously thought of as homework in general. He was no longer bothered by school. Naruto, on the other hand, began to enjoy it. Therefore, he was fine with working for a few more years. Naruto actually eagerly anticipated the upcoming term. Making progress made learning much more enjoyable. The fact that no one made fun of him was another significant difference. Or his responses. No one, not even his teachers. Additionally, they did not reject his abilities or expel him from class. In actuality, he was frequently commended for his accomplishments and diligence. Even so, people like his guards needed to be aware of how far behind he had fallen. Hell, he would find it difficult not to laugh at some of his previous responses now that he had a better understanding of the situation. However, he has only received tolerance, clarifications, and mild corrections thus far. The majority of the Konoha material was still recalled by Naruto, who at last grasped the teacher's point. Or better yet, not to say they had been making every effort to complicate any subject beyond their level of understanding, utilizing lengthy, intricate language for straightforward facts. For instance, he could still recall Konoha's explanation of chakra. He didn't understand the significance at the time. It said that one part of spiritual energy and one part of physical energy combined to form a chakra. One must practice any haphazard chakra application to increase control. Each component can be improved for increased capacity. Naruto was unable to understand it back in Konoha. He now realized that it basically meant that chakra is a combination of physical strength and focus. Simply practice some jutsu that uses chakra. If you want to find it easier to use, you must study and train your body. If you want more chakra. He was given another definition by his teacher. A ninja can create chakra by visualizing the strength of his body as a liquid. Liquid strength. To move in a certain direction was then visualized. This requires a calm mind. For more chakra, visualize a larger flow. For less, visualize a smaller one. You can use chakra in this way. The effect of a jutsu depends on the exact path you envision your chakra taking. Every jutsu has a unique path. Continue using chakra to gain better control. Ideally, you can hardly make it with jutsu. Studying will increase your chakra, and training will increase your strength. After more than 5 minutes of hesitation, Naruto's teacher reluctantly responded when he shared the definition he had previously learned. Her description seemed to cover all of Konoha's points in a way that is simpler to comprehend. Furthermore, Konoha's explanation was much less specific and completely unhelpful in real-world scenarios. His teacher said that if anyone could make even one jutsu work without the part about visualizing the chakra flow, it would be a miracle, and that individual would most likely be a natural. Naruto was certain that Konoha had betrayed him. No one gave him an explanation of the chakra path, not for Bunshin, Henge, or Kawarimi. He could still clearly recall the week of Kawarimi's debut. Theory was covered in the first lesson. These are some tactics for using jutsu. At the conclusion of the lesson, he and the others had tried Kawarimi. Although everyone wanted to master the jutsu, no one was able to advance. He was dragged to the director by a teacher the very next day. Then, Naruto had done nothing, because he trained Kawarimi every single minute. He was certain of it for more than 30 minutes. The director continued to yell at him. However, after giving it some thought, they did not place him in detention. Their usual tactic was to cause him as much trouble as possible. The other students had mastered the jutsu by the time he returned to class, and their only practice was to increase their speed and other skills. While he was being yelled at, the teachers must have demonstrated how to perform Kawarimi. It makes sense why everyone picked things up faster than him. He just didn't have enough knowledge. That was not the only occasion. Several explanations that were unclear and unhelpful were still in his memory. In addition, he was frequently pulled to the director or expelled from class for no apparent reason. Sometimes they even didn't bother inventing anything. Well, there's no point in lingering on the past. On the plus side, he could assess his current understanding against that of his former classmate. At the end of his final year, he had now caught up to what a typical student was, and he had only begun a week earlier. Kagebushins are just fantastic. He thought he had a ways to go, and Naruto was eager to surpass Sasuke Teme in his abilities. It wouldn't be the end. Either Naruto would still lag behind the typical second-year diamond student even after he was placed on an equal footing with the Teme. And he ought to be the year's top star as a future king. Gran never spoke. It's true, Gigi obviously couldn't give a damn. However, the queen was always overjoyed to see Naruto training or reading, even delighted. Heck, his guards were equally ecstatic about his rapid advancement. He will most likely be at the top of the year when school starts if he keeps up his current pace, except for history. That is, it will require a little more time, but since Naruto has been in Konoha before, no one will be concerned. Furthermore, it makes sense that Konoha and Titan had different histories, a different history class. As a result, in any case, Naruto will most likely catch up in history a month after classes begin. These days, life was definitely different. He was unique, and he is extremely happy about it now. He had family. He no longer felt alone. Hell, since meeting Gran, he hadn't spent a single minute alone. Nor was it a case of ignoring one another while standing next to each other. His guards watched him intently enough to make the Siamese twins swell with jealousy. In addition, everyone was friendly. Naruto didn't even know anyone. Sometimes he was still unable to comprehend it. No one had made fun of Naruto since he had arrived in Titan. That's not even close. Rather, he received courteous, kind treatment from everyone. For a moment, Naruto pondered whether kids with families view such lives as typical. Everyone showered him with love, support, and attention. Konoha had piled those items on top of Sasuke Teme, perhaps even more. It was a little difficult to tell. Additionally, it became absurdly simple to receive affection and praise now. Simply read something, work on your homework, or train for a bit in Konoha. That had never worked. However, they believed him to be the demon fox. He was even thought to be the fox by the Hokage. Attempting to tame him is even more extreme. He was so glad to have his family tree. Boy, there's no demon or fox, they're just people. He even hung it up in his room after framing it. His evidence that he was fully human was there, slightly to his left, next to the bookcase. Naruto shook his head, reminding himself that it was now over. He had family and lived in Titan, not Konoha. He liked the girls who were watching over him, and they might even be friends. Although he enjoyed the company, he still didn't believe he would require guards. They were enjoyable and pleasant as well. Maya merely pointed out that they were essentially paid to spend time with him. But Naruto offered to persuade the Gran not to guard him. Not that they had any more enjoyable missions to choose from. He simply abandoned the conversation and came to terms with them following him everywhere. In any case, Naruto would just take pleasure in it and work to please his family. He didn't feel the need to prove himself to everyone here. It appeared that they already thought he was deserving of being their leader. He wouldn't let them down, anyway. Food actually made a significant difference as well. Naruto had been concerned that his eating habits would land him in trouble. Specifically, with the quantity of food Naruto desired to consume, he then noticed that others were eating just as much, including Gran and his guards. Gigi was the only one who liked smaller portions. As soon as he saw it, Naruto naturally inquired about it. It seems that having a nature bloodline speeds up a person's metabolism to the point where he needs to consume 10 times as much food as someone without the bloodline in order to survive the day without going hungry. Naruto's constant hunger was understandable. He had only received a meager monthly stipend in Konoha. Furthermore, it had not been nearly sufficient to purchase the necessary amount of food. In addition, they overcharged because they thought he was a demon. In the end, it turned out that he had starved in Konoha. It's simple. Naruto had been starving for so long and so frequently that he had hardly noticed it anymore. He had only experienced the dull ache in his stomach a few days after being invited to Ichiraku's. It informed him that something was missing once more because Naruto had eaten until he was full at the ramen stand the day before. He'd learned to ignore it, though as if he'd had no other option. Naruto would not have had any money at the end of the week for the remainder of the month. If he had eaten as much as he wanted, he would most likely have passed away by now if those invitations hadn't been sent. Naruto had always been restless due to his nearly constant hunger, frequent rejection or disregard, general boredom, and lack of friends. But for the first time in his life, he was much calmer, more relaxed, and generally happier after a lot of exercise, lessons, a loving family, amusing friends, understanding teachers, and enough food. But he still had plenty of energy to expend. However, there are other methods as well, such as games, training, studying, or new skills he has acquired, like writing or dancing. Naruto didn't really have time to pull a practical joke on anyone because of everything. Additionally, he still liked everyone too much to pull practical jokes on them. Not even his pranks were missed in any case. Playing catch, card games, or dancing with his guards was much more enjoyable. His guards were big dancers. The frequency of their desire to dance was astounding. However, Ayame-chan claimed that there weren't many boys in Diamond to dance with and that practically all girls enjoyed dancing, so perhaps it wasn't so strange. However, their other favorite of all time was equally so. They enjoyed reading Icha Paradise, Kyoko and Haruhi. Not so much. They always passed out on the floor or ended up in various shades of red. Naruto refused to read it aloud whenever either of those two were on guard duty. Because of this, he didn't wish to cause them any problems. The others, however, enjoyed learning about Rajija. Even Naruto. It's true that the girls initially had to persuade him. However, Naruto enjoys reading, especially if it's for his girls. So much so that he began reading them another book, a short tale of adventure that he read whenever Kyoko or Haruhi needed to focus and he was too exhausted from training to sit up. Icha Paradise was still preferred by the majority. Miyuki, Tariko, and Mariko discovered the mess Rajija got into with unusual regularity. They thought it was hilarious and wanted to hear about everything, no matter how foolish. According to Kaji, Rika, and Ayame, They could use the book as a poor example to inform him of the hero's errors and what to do in real life. Instead, Naruto was able to identify some of Rajia's mistakes by this point, and with each page they talked about, he improved. However, Naruto was unaware that his guards had a few more explanations for this distinctly strange fascination. Actually, Tariko and Mariko desired to woo Naruto also. Kaji, to be honest, the action wasn't even political. All they wanted was to enjoy themselves. After all, they were only young girls on the verge of becoming women and, aside from the prince, had no boys around. Well, Rika's explanation might be a tad superior perhaps. Because it was his responsibility to carry on the royal line, she wanted him to be attracted to girls. If the royal line were to end, she would think it a shame the book didn't really bother Kazami or Maya. They just didn't give a damn and didn't act as though they did. Miyuki meant to laugh at Rajia's trouble, but she just wanted to have some fun. The only person who genuinely wanted him to read Morea regardless of the buka was Ayame, who also wanted to offer him dating advice just because Naruto seemed like a nice guy to her. He glanced at his girls around him. Kyoko and Tariko sat on the floor close to his bed. They had persuaded her to get a little scat, and even though we were cheating, we were losing badly. Naruto suppressed a chuckle and searched for Ayame. She showed Haruhi how to put on makeup while she was by a window. Miyuki was standing beside her. She was on guard duty and, for once, kept quiet. Kazami and Kaji were also on guard duty. Kazami was by his desk, and Kaji was at the door. They were clearly keeping watch and in key locations. It was remarkable how at ease and self-assured Kazami was while on duty, and how uncomfortable she was everywhere else. Rika and Maya, the other two, accumulated sit-ups. Naruto wasn't sure if they were attempting to inspire one another or compete with one another. In any case, they were both already over the 200 mark and were counting loudly enough for each other to hear. The rooms next to Naruto's have been occupied by his guards, but actually just kept their belongings there, or, if they were exhausted, to sleep during the day. They spent most of their time in his room, even spending the night here. I believe there were always at least 3 girls awake. At least they had to act as though they were aware of potential threats. He was still a little sore from his training, but he thought about joining them. Taking part in the card game was also prohibited with 3 players. Scat performed best, and if someone wanted to put makeup on him, he was completely prepared to flee, or his Gigi that left reading Icha Icha Paradise, or going on guard duty, which is kind of pointless. After a brief interrogation, Naruto was sprawled on his bed with his off-duty guards sprawled around him. The on-duty girls remained at their posts, but they undoubtedly listened in. Paradise Icha Icha. When our charming hero, Rajija, arrived in the next town, he went straight to the local doctor because a doctor is typically a nurse as well. Rajija felt that he needed the gentle care of a nurse, and staying at a nursing home was a surefire way to get it. In addition, he always wanted to play doctor with a real nurse. Sadly, Rajija found no adorable little nurse in the doctor's waiting room. Instead, he saw an elderly and overweight nurse who was already around 25. With a sigh of disappointment, Rajija headed for the door when he noticed a stunning angel emerge from the bathroom. The woman was unquestionably under 20, a little pale, with a slim waist and large breasts, light blue eyes, brown wavy hair, and a pretty face. She was definitely under 20, and Rajija would spend the next few days there. With one of his best pickup lines, Rajija immediately began flirting. "My love for you is like diarrhea, I just can't keep it in." Beautiful was apparently stunned by his amazing flirting skills and swiftly covered a small container with something brown. If the first was so successful, then the second would complete the picture. "Do you need a man to spend all of your money on?" asked Rajija.
So that's it for today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, share and subscribe to the channel for more awesome stories like this. Thank you. See you all in my next video.